So we talked last time about the way up and the way down. So if you have particular beauties in this world, as we call it, the physical world, the world that we get through our eyes and ears and our senses, these beauties are images or appearances or reflections or shadows, etc., 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 of real beauty, the form of beauty, which is the reality, or the original. And the way up is to reorient one's soul away from these things and towards this. So one way of understanding that is to detach from one's senses and to focus on one's reason, because this is the intelligible realm, which is to say things here can be understood, but they can't be seen, whereas this is the sensible realm. Things here can be seen and heard, and so on, but they can't be understood as such. They can only be understood as images of the reality. And so we have our eyeball and our ears and so on down here, but it's our reason, which is part of our soul, which is in this realm, reason which we cannot see, which communes with this. Okay, so that's what we did last time. And then Tadashi Sensei was asking me a lot of very good questions about the way down, which I felt I was only half able to answer, and I can say more now. But a lot of the focus in Platonism is on the, this should say the way up. A lot of the focus on Platonism is on the way up, which is to say, how to turn away from the senses and towards reason. That's philosophy and so on. And the emphasis is there because that's the first step, and also because our natural condition when we're born into the world is here. Children emphasize these things, and it's through education that we come here. But when it comes to the way down, that is also important, and Plato, I don't think, puts much emphasis on it, nor do subsequent Platonists, and that was what Tadashi Sensei was asking about. But it's there if you look for it, and one of the ways that it's there is in the very opening of the dialogue, where Socrates not only goes down, physically down to the Piraeus, he goes down in order to look at these things. Even though he's got this doctrine of true beauty and so on, he cares very much about these things. So much so, as you'll recall, he walks 11 miles down and then is heading back 11 miles. So it'd be like he went to Kurama on foot, saw the fire festival, and then was going to walk back. Instead, they stay for the whole conversation. So it's not, this is a misunderstanding of Platonism. A misunderstanding is called, in English, asceticism. I don't know, what would the word be for this? The idea of the sage, the wise person, goes into a cave and contemplates his thoughts and ignores the world. That would be an ascetic. By the way, this is a Greek word originally, askesis, which just means training. And it originally meant the training of athletes. And what asceticism comes to mean in a religious context is exercising that rigorous training that athletes have used for the Olympic Games and doing it for the spiritual life, where it then gets to be understood particularly as training oneself to ignore these things and to focus instead on this. And although I'm not denying that that has a role in Platonism as a stage in one's education, it's not the end of the story, because as we see, Socrates returns to the Piraeus and he wants to really, really see these things. So I'll take Hiroka's questions in a moment because they're in this area. But the evidence is there in Plato that Socrates cares about these things, but how can you care about these things if this is true? That's the philosophical question. And the best answer I can give so far, or at least the one I gave last week, is that if you want to appreciate these things, you should appreciate them for what they are. So that if they're images, you only truly appreciate them if you see them as images. If you treat them as real, you're misunderstanding them. You're not seeing them as they really are. But it doesn't mean disregard them altogether. The best analogy I have for this is a picture. If you have a picture, let's say of your mother, someone that you love, you don't confuse the picture with your mother. In other words, you may kiss the picture as a sign of devotion, but you wouldn't like try to have a relationship with the picture. It's just an image. You should be focused on your mother, and then the image is there as a reminder of your mother. But neither do you disregard the image. You don't tear up a picture of your mother. You give it respect because it's an image of somebody that you love. So to treat it properly is to treat it as an image. So that if, for example, you go to a museum, this is already bleeding into her questions, and you see beautiful things, they're like pictures of your mother. You respect them, you give them the attention that they deserve, but you don't confuse them with what they're images of, which is true beauty.
It's not what they are.
That's right.
What they really are.
What they really are. Yeah. Platonism is very simple. Like you can say it in one sentence. It's live in reality. Of course, finding out what reality is takes a lot of work, and then actually living in reality takes a lot of spiritual work, because we're just drawn to these things as if they're real. Another way of putting the point is that if we ignore this and we just think this is real, remember, these are not the philosopher. The philosopher turns here at the end of book 5, but the lover of sights and sounds, the lover of experience, stays here and thinks this is philosophical nonsense. The problem with that, beyond the logic and so on, is that if you treat an image as real, you will be disappointed by it. Because it's merely an image. Just like if you have a picture of someone you love, if you try to have a relationship with the picture, you'll just get frustrated. And you'll become resentful of the picture because it's not giving you what you need. So I stepped into Hiroka's questions because she invited me, after her last class, she invited me to an exhibit
Shokokuji Temple's museum.
of artifacts from tea ceremonies.
ミュージアム
出会ってばったり出会って誘ったんで
十牛図の本物は小国寺なんでね、
そうなんですね
一番有名なやつが、見てないか
それはなかったです
な。なかった、常設してるやけどね。
なんかティーセレモニーのなんか私の質問は私はそのお茶碗とか見るのが好きで、そのお茶碗っていうのはI'm now trying to explain them my question。お茶碗っていうのはその五大元素みたいなもののこう現れてすごい美しいと思ってすごい見るのが好きだったんだけど、でもこのプラトンのこのクラスを取った後で今まで好きだったそれを見るとこの美しさっていうのはこのトゥルービューティーなのかどうかっていうのはちょっと分からなくなって、just appearance なんじゃないかっていうふうにちょっと思ったんですね。でじゃあもしそのトゥルービューティーにこうガッと分かった人がそのティーボードを見た時にはそこに本物のそのビューティーっていうものを見ることができるんだろうか、降りてきた時っていうようなことを聞いたの。
ちょっとじゃあ続き西平先生がこれを言われたのは多分私の推測なんやけど、そのこのイメージとディアリティが別物じゃない。つまりリアリティを知った後にこのイメージとかアピアランス、鼓舞というのかな、この2つ別々じゃなくてまた1つになるんですよ、それ。だから降りてくる必然性みたいなのは、 まあとにかく東洋思想って割とそういうこと言うので、分けては考えないから、一つ一つ別にその茶碗ってなんかいろいろ有限で限定はされてるけども、なんていうかな、リアリティそのものなんですよ。それはリアリティは別にはないんですということを、西平先生は考えてこの方向性を訴えないかなと思うんですけどね。
She's saying that when
Yes.
Doshisha asked you a question about way down, he was thinking that in Eastern philosophy that the true beauty up there
Yes.
and each image
Yes.
on the real world, in the sensible world, when you
向こうに届いてからですか。
まあそれはそう
まず言ってからですね。
イーチシングスっていうかな、イーチシングっていうか、
あ、そうそう。
古物なんや。イメージを見てるんじゃなくて、ありのままの古物なんで、まあその中にイメージもあるけど、イメージを見るわけないんですよ。
Sorry, but what I said that each image in the sensible world, but it actually is the thing itself.
Yes.
The thing.
Yes.
That in front of you.
Yes.
And when you're gone there and then coming back,
Yes.
then when you look at this thing,
Yes.
You see both.
一緒に見る、
一緒やなくて、いや、もう論理は一体なんで、別々じゃないんですよ。
It's going to be the one thing that the true beauty that up there and the thing in front of you
Yes.
is going to be the same thing. So when you look at it, you see it all together.
Yes.
So it's not like probably Doshisha was saying it's the same thing and not beauty up there
Yes.
and
Yes.
here in front of you. But
Yes.
if you know it, you see that when you see the
So it is called, it's kind of a contradiction, but it is a non-dual identity between the reality and the thing.
Yes.
No difference.
Yes.
まあでも、まあそのリアリティを知らなあかんよ、それ最初に。知らないでそういうこと言っててもそれはなんか間違ってるんやけどね。でもリアリティは別の場所にあるというふうに考えないんやわ。それはここにあるっていうふうに捉えるので。
So, well, of course, when you see the pot as in such a way, you have to know the reality. But probably in Eastern, what Yoshi is saying that in Eastern philosophy that you don't think the reality is up there, but it's already, it's every time here.
ちょっと質問いいですか、これ。下の511の B の 511B の 511の B、C の手前ぐらいなんか文字通り下に置かれたものうんぬんうんぬんで、それによってついにもはや仮説でないものにまで至り万有の資源に到達することになる。そしてその資源を把握した上で今度は逆に資源に連絡し続くものを次々と触れたどりながら最後の結末まで加工していくのであれば、その際およそ感覚されるものを補助的に用いることは一切なく、うんぬんうんぬんって感覚されるものを補助的に用いることは一切なくっていうのは、これはどういうことなんですかね。このさっき今の話で言うと、このイメージとこの目を使う
用いるっていうのがなんかあれだよね。感覚的なものは無視は、僕の話でいくとね、それ無視はしないというかな、感覚だからありのままみたいなこと言うちょっと言葉は簡単なんやけど、それは感覚的に捉えられるものは含まれてると思うんやけどね。それは最初の感覚とは違うんや、多分な。スタートの時の感覚じゃないけど、やっぱりこうぐるっと回って感覚に戻るような気がするんだけどね。プラトンは違うってことかな。
これちょっと聞いてみます。
実相だけをして実相を通って実相、でも実相しか見てないとも言えるんですよ。 だから感覚と実相、リアリティは矛盾してるけど同一なんですわ。だから論理的にはないよこの話は全然。だから論理的に話をこうすると分からなくなる。
So it's like pointing out part 511 B and C.
Yes.
There's a
一
description
神教と半神教みたい
like
な。
reaching to the like origin of
あんまり
everything
関係ないよ
and
ね。
going down to the like actual
関心論と
Yeah.
神は関係ないから。この場合
So that's actually where we're going to start today. It's called the divided line. Before I get to it, though, I want to make sure that I've answered Hiroka's questions, or at least I've tried. Is there anything more that you want to? Because you had 3 very specific questions, and
So-
what I was saying was just kind of an introduction to the topic again.
Maybe his question will be something to do with my question as well.
Yes. Okay. And do you have a specific question, or should I
Oh
talk
yeah,
about the line?
and just like we're looking at 511 and B
Yes.
and C, and there's a description such as like after reaching to the origin of everything, and then like after that you're gonna be like going down to the actual planets, to daily lives,
Mm-hmm.
いやうんみたいな
and then you're gonna grasp everything as it is, as it is like the idea,
Mm-hmm.
but without any sensation, without any senses.
Okay.
So what is the meaning of without any senses?
Okay.
And yeah.
Okay, so I'll back up and I'll just explain what's called the divided line, which is what this is talking about,
Yeah.
which is the 2 pages previous to this.
Yeah.
And it is the one thing from book 6 that I didn't talk about last class that I thought we still need to talk about that because it's foundational for things that continue. So, but before I do that, Hiroka, are you satisfied, or do you want to ask your questions?
So maybe this is related to 490B.
490b.
And Socrates says, until he grasps what the nature of each thing itself.
Each thing itself. So-
What this here, each thing is that
The form of beauty, that's each thing itself. These are shadows
I
of
thought-
things.
I thought that.
Yes, yes. These are the real things. These are just shadows. I'm gonna put this vividly. We've already done half the work that we need to make this point, but this will make the point in a way that you won't forget. Do you remember how he describes the relationship between reason and beauty? Real beauty? He doesn't describe it as thinking, although that's what you would expect him to say. Do you remember? We read it out loud.
Last time,
I think it was last time, yes.
Yoko translated it.
Yes, you did. Well, I'll just remind you. This is sex.
Ah,
You remember we read that passage? Now, most people don't think about that passage. The reason I think about that passage is for 2 reasons. One is he chooses that metaphor on purpose because it's a union. It's not one thing contemplating another thing. It's rather the one equaling the second thing. They become the same thing. So there's an identity here. That's at the summit of understanding. That's one reason that, well, he chooses this, and one reason why, as a result, I focused on it. But there's another reason, which we can talk about now, which is there is sex between bodies which are in the sensible realm. And it's tempting to say, as we did last time, this is real and this is a metaphor. In other words, Plato is reaching for a way to describe something that's very difficult to describe, and so he takes something real and he transposes it into a metaphor. That's wrong. I'll tell you why, but can you tell me why that's wrong? Not that Plato's wrong, but that the way I just described it is wrong. The way I described it last week is wrong.
Could you please explain again, like, yeah.
Okay.
illustration.
Okay. So, well, from the beginning, you can tell me to speed up if I'm saying things that you already understand. He describes this relationship between reason and the forms as sex. Okay. Why does he do that? He's definitely doing it because he's trying to emphasize this is a union. This is not a subject contemplating an object, because then you get a duality that creates all kinds of problems that we didn't get into. He wants a union. Okay, and so that's why last week I stressed that, so that you got that point. But the way I did it, deliberately, because I didn't want to add too much. But now I want to undo something that was erroneous. The way I described it last week was I said, this is a metaphor. He's taken something real that we all understand, and he's transposed it as a metaphor so that we can understand this. And now what I'm saying to you is, I have just made a mistake. I made the same mistake last week. I did it deliberately because it would have confused you if I did too much. But now I want you to see what the mistake was so you can go to the next level of understanding. And so I'm just inviting you to think about it. What's the mistake? I'll say it one more time, not from the beginning. This is real sex. This is metaphorical sex. What's the mistake?
Because ideas, reason or sex would be not metaphorical.
What would it be?
It should be true sex.
Yeah, that's real, exactly. And so what's this?
Picturesque or
metaphor.
Metaphor.
Yeah, image. That's the revolution of Platonism, is that things that everybody talks about as real are not real. They're images, they're metaphors. And that when you teach Platonism, it's hard because that's where people are. And you're trying to get them to see this is real. And so you have to start by saying, here's his metaphor for this. But once you get to the final stage, you see, no, that's not a metaphor at all. He's saying, that's real. This is the image.
Like the table.
That's right. That's right. There's the real table, and then the images of the tables. Now, is there a real table? This is your question. How many forms are there? Is there a form of every noun? And I said, provisionally then, let's just say there is. Because we're not trying to say whether this whole picture is true at that point. We're just trying to get it. And I'm saying, if you want to get it, just, everything that there's a noun for, but he can't believe that. I don't think he thinks there's a form of mud, and he doesn't think there's a form of computer and a form of marker. Every time we invent something, we find out, oh, there was already a form of that. No, I don't think he thinks that. What does he think then? What he thinks is, there's this super form, if you like, to the point that he even stops calling it a form eventually. The good. And everything else is an image. So this would be courage, and this would be justice, that's beauty, and so on. And if you like, mud, etc. These are just images. There's only one reality. And that's God. The good. And that's why he's skeptical of everything. That's why academic skepticism is, I think, the true Platonic philosophy. Claims about these things are going to turn out to be true and false at the same time from different perspectives and so on. There's going to be so much relativity. But claims about these things, too, are going to turn out to be true and false relative to perspectives. So in my paper, which some of you read, I talk about courage and how Stalin had true courage. But it would have been better for the world if Stalin had not had courage, because he wouldn't have accomplished the massacres that he accomplished. He wouldn't have become who he became. So that even the virtues are shadows or images. Because just like things down here can be beautiful on one day, not beautiful on another day, beautiful to one person, not beautiful to another person, beautiful in one light, ugly from a different light, and so on, so too the virtues, even the forms, are going to be relative. this is going to be the only thing that's not relative. So that's why I said, yeah, let's allow them all, because in the end it's not going to matter, because none of them are actually real. And now think about the cave. The cave starts with prisoners who are looking at images on the wall. But those are images of the originals, the models, we call them. So there's the puppeteer who's parading a model of a tree, and then there's the image of the model. So these are images of models. But models are images of the real tree, which is the one outside the cave. And then ultimately there's the sun. So the sun is the only real. Then there's the image of the real. That would be the forms. In this case, these. And then there's the image of the image of the real. And then the image of the image of the image. In other words, we're born into a very deep cave where it's not just that we see images, but we could turn and look at realities. It's going to be a very long lifetime education that actually might have to span over many lives. If you finished The Republic, you saw there's a story about reincarnation at the end. And he's aware that education takes many lives of gradually peeling away images until you get to the reality. And the divided line, which I'll turn to in a moment now, that's going to make this clearer. Because this is basically the sun analogy, and then there's the cave, and the line sort of expands the sun, and then you turn to the cave in Book 7. And then when you understand the line, the cave is pretty straightforward. But before I do that, I want to say one thing that I wish Professor Tadashi were here for, but is I got thinking about it because of your questions over the weekend. This is a new thought for me. I'm very happy with this. That, he kept asking me, what's the Greek word for the way down? And I thought, what would it be? And, first of all, Plato doesn't say the way down. That's just my description from Heraclitus of these two. But what would it be? It would be poetry. Making. Poetry in a broad sense. Making. Making children. Making poems. Making a school. Making a class. Making a book, and so on. But here's my new thought. When you write a poem, because Ikora wrote me about how she writes poetry, and I was thinking I've done some of the same myself. When you write a poem, you've got kind of an idea in your mind as you start. But it's not that you have the entire poem in your mind, and you just transcribe it onto the page. You've got a kind of vague idea, and then as you write, it takes shape. And then you can, when it goes well, when you finish the poem, you can realize, that's what I was trying to say. You learn through the production what the idea was. And so this is what I wish I could say to Professor Tadashi, is that I don't yet understand this contradiction about how when you see the T-Bowl in the museum, you're seeing the real beauty, because I'm still stuck, if you like, in this twofold picture where there's the real and there's the image. But I feel like I'm getting there with this, that as you produce, as you write your book, as you write your poem, as you have your children and you raise them and whatever you're doing with your life, that's your poesis. But it's not like you've been up to God and the beautiful, and now you're just churning out the results. It's rather you are engaging with the images in a way that helps you see what the idea is. So what I want to say, to boil it down, is that I've described this as if they were two processes. The way up, you see God, then you just do stuff. As if it's, do this first, then come down. And it's simpler to describe it that way, but I don't think that's what it actually is. I think it's, we do this, and that gives us understanding of this.
in the process of doing.
Yes, yes.
So my question is, the whole process of production is could be called as poiesis or not? So we can call it as poiesis.
So it's whatever, at least in Greek, it's always going to be called poiesis, because that's a very neutral term that just means making, production. But we give it a special meaning in English when we think poetry, doing something noble, and so on. And I'm developing that thought that when you're writing a poem, you are doing something noble. You're not just taking your understanding of God and just putting it on the page. Through writing it, you're coming to an understanding of this principle. Let me add another Greek word or two. Noesis means understanding. It's from the Greek nous, which means mind. This is an English word that you're probably familiar with, theoria, from which we get theory. It's the Greek word, theoria, for contemplation. So, the way up is described by Plato and Aristotle as theoria and noesis, contemplation. And that fits kind of nicely with the picture of, well, the monk goes into the cave and just contemplates God and leaves the sensible world behind. And then there's a contrast with, then he leaves the cave and he goes out and he teaches and he has students, he might have children, he might write books. That's his poiesis. And what I'm trying to say in response to your questions, and this is the new thought for me, is these can be the same thing. These are not different things. The poiesis is a contemplation. The having children is contemplating God. I mean, done in the right way, of course. Just like poetry, done in the right way, can be a theoria or a noesis, a contemplation, an understanding.
That might be true. So I always feel like the process of production of poetry is like a contemplation.
Yes.
So every time I feel like I'm now contemplate or meditating something towards to grasp the reality.
Yes. Yes.
The capital reality.
Yes.
But every time I fail, but
Sure. Sure.
repeated
Yes.
I
Yes.
I desire to do that contemplation again and again.
Yes. I've had an experience since I've been in Japan. It's been a month now. You know, there's so many shrines, and I haven't gone to a lot of
Especially
them.
here in California.
Yes, but I've gone to enough that I sort of get. I feel like I'm exaggerating. Get the idea. I sort of know what to expect. I still don't understand really, but the first thought I had is the thought that you would have if you'd never been to the West before and you step into a Catholic church for the first time. It's that people are doing these strange things, and they do them regularly. Why are they doing this? I think ritual is a form of poiesis. And there's two, in my mind, and certainly in the Western mind, I think, there's too stark a contrast between contemplating God, which is like going into a cave and meditating, versus lighting candles, putting a prayer on a card and hanging it at the shrine, bowing and so on. I'm just trying to mix these rituals from Catholicism and from Shinto, I guess, or is it Buddhism, as if those are two separate things. And what I'm coming to understand over the weekend, thanks to your question, or I guess, what is today, Thursday, over the last few days, is they can be the same thing. The ritual can be the contemplation. It's not like contemplation is separate from ritual. I haven't done your line yet. I'll do your line.
確認の質問の一つ、この線からなんていうの、
She has
イ
a
ンテリジ
question.
ェン
Oh, okay.
だから全部イデアっていうか、フォームとか、 リアリティない全部イデアのはずないけど一番上のグッドっていうか善のイデアだけがリアリティなんですからで他はイメージというふうに捉えていいかなだからなんていうこの線から全部イデアの世界なんだけども善のイデアだけが唯一のイデアであとはそれのイメージみたいな捉え方になるわけです
真ん中のジャスティスとかビューティーとかのことですね。
それも全部イデアの世界のはずなんやけど
Well, he's asking that about this line, there's a justice of beauty, and then there's a good on the very top, right?
Yes.
So he's asking, are you saying that this justice of beauty or the other types of the idea? I
Yes.
think all of them are idea, right?
Except for this.
Oh, that is a different one.
So he does sometimes call it the form of the good, but then in another dialogue, the Parmenides, he's clear that it can't be a form. And even in the Republic, when he says it's beyond reality, or these are the realities, it can't be.
別次元
So yeah, that's another line.
次元が違う
Sure. Yes. So this perfect segue, perfect bridge to the line. So it's sometimes called the divided line. This is at the end of book 6. Okay?
これ呼び方ないイデア界を超えてるわけでしょ呼び方はないのか
Is there a name for
Idea
the place
界を超え
on
る
the
としか言え
very
ない
top? Is like, can you just say like it's beyond the idea, the world of idea, or is there
The
a
good.
name for that?
The good.
全部
Or the one.
The one.
The one. Yeah. The three names he uses are the one, the good, and the beautiful. But Plotinus, again, this commentator that I've been influenced, he thinks the beautiful is the least adequate name. The good is the better name. The best of all names is the one. Okay, I'm going to erase this to make room for the line. Yeah, you can take it. Okay?
I feel like I want to ask about that picture later.
This picture?
Yeah.
By all means. I think half of our questions will be answered by doing the line, and then things will be clearer, and then we can talk as much as we want, but I think this will help. Okay, so the line is simply a line, and it's divided into 4 sections. He's kind of finicky about the proportions for reasons I don't really understand, so I'm just going to do them as simple quadrants. Plato's a mathematician and a numerologist, and the reading for today, you would have seen that he thinks there's special astronomical calculations you can do to know when babies should be born and so on, and I've never looked into that, so I leave that out of my interpretation, for better or for worse. All right, so the line is doing 2 things at once. It's doing ontology, and it's doing epistemology. Now I'll explain those, but do you remember what they mean? It's ontology.
About
存在
being.
Being, reality. And this is about
認識の
Knowledge.
knowledge. Okay, good. So this is going to be about being. This is going to be an account of being. This is going to be an account of knowledge. And they're going to go side by side because he thinks, if you recall from book 5, every cognitive state has an object. So these are cognitive states. They're going to have objects. Maybe I'll flip it around so that it's the same. Doesn't matter. So that it's the same order that we had last time. All right. Let's start from the beginning. This is serving all kinds of purposes, but let's do it as education because of our current situation in this school and your majors and so on. So imagine a child in the very first stage of education, 2, 3 years old. What faculty of mind, what ability are you appealing to? when you educate a child of 2 or 3? We've already seen Plato in book 2 and 3 describing how you educate children. What do you use?
Poem.
Stories.
Stories.
Yes, music. Quotation marks. Stories, especially poetic stories, set to what we call music. So the faculty of mind that you're appealing to is imagination. And when I remember the Greek words, I'll give them to you. Ikasia. Because imagination is a faculty that works with images. Or an akos. An English word that is derived from this is icon. So in the Christian church, there are pictures of God, especially in the Eastern Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, and so on. Pictures of God, Jesus, Mary, and so on. They're called icons. These are images of God. They're not God himself. Say, as opposed to traditional Greek religion of Plato's time, when there was a statue of Zeus, the Greeks treated that as if that were Zeus. Very clear in the Christian churches that those pictures, those statues are not God. Those are images of God. So at any rate, we're dealing with children as we educate them. We're appealing to their imagination, which is a very low cognitive state, very far from knowledge. You don't think that you're giving a child knowledge in the fullest sense. You're giving them a familiarity with the world. You're giving them something, but it's a dim image of what ultimately they will come to understand. But that's because of their limited abilities. They're only 2, 3 years old. The next stage, as we go up, is what Plato calls the originals, the things of which these are images. And the English word translation is, this is in Greek, doxa, from which we get, or dogma sometimes. Dogmatic belief, where it's got a, we would say in English, propositional structure. It's got, it's like a sentence, like God is 3 persons. I'm just thinking of the Christian story here. That can be true or false. That's a dogma. It's a sentence. And you don't say to a 2 or 3-year-old, God is 3 persons. You don't just give them a statement like that. You tell them a story. Jesus went to his Father and asked for something on behalf of humanity. This doesn't have to be religious. Because of these words, dogma and icon, I've gotten into a religious mindset. But we could have here the story of Little Red Riding Hood that I mentioned earlier. You tell the story of Little Red Riding Hood, which has a talking wolf in it. That's a lie. Do you remember what kind of lie it is? He distinguishes between 2 kinds of lies back in book 2. He calls that a lie in words, because wolves don't talk. But are you deceiving the child when you tell her the story of Little Red Riding Hood? Because wolves don't talk? No, you're not. So you're not telling her a lie in her soul. You're using a lie in words to give her a truth in her soul. And that's a feature of images, is that they can convey truths through lies. Whereas once we get to here, you don't want people believing false things. This child might believe, as a result of your story, that wolves talk. When she's advanced to this stage of education, you start telling truths, and truths only, giving her true beliefs. Telling her, for example, wolves don't talk. Real wolves, you would say then, real wolves. Ultimately, in Plato, they're not going to be real, but real wolves don't talk. There was never a girl named Little Red Riding Hood. She never existed. You would say true things. But imagine this is like your 13-year-old daughter. The reason I told you that story is because you could only understand images, and I gave you images. Even though they were lies in words, I was trying to convey an important lesson to you that I wanted to get into your soul. The world is a dangerous place for girls. There are wolves out there, so to speak. There are men who will, take you away and do terrible things with you. Eat you alive like a wolf, but no, something else. So you describe the originals and you would give the girl beliefs, true beliefs. And this is the bottom of the line. Are there any questions about the bottom of the line? Okay. Why does there need to be a top? Imagine that you've gotten, your 13-year-old daughter to understand that the wolf represented a rapist and the girl represented a teen girl. You've given her true beliefs. What more is there to teach? Let me ask it this way, because don't worry about Little Red Riding Hood, that was just my example. Is education just putting true beliefs into kids' minds?
No.
No. You don't want to put false beliefs, so it's better that you're putting true beliefs than false beliefs, but you got to do something more than just implant dogma. You have to do more than just transfer true beliefs into people's brains. What do you want them to get?
Critical thinking. Okay,
that's a good start. So let's call that science. He doesn't give, he does give a Greek word for this, dianoia. There's no English derivative for that. But I think science is what he has in mind. You want them to start thinking critically so that they can do, for example, they can determine whether beliefs are true or false on their own. And how does the scientific method work? It hadn't been formalized by Plato's time, but he's got something like this in mind. You grow up, you've got a bunch of beliefs, but now you're being taught how to determine which ones are true and which ones are false. So what do you do if you're a scientist? You want to find out if a particular belief is true or false.
Experiment.
You do some kind of experiment. You work with experience, which is all experiment means, just another English word for experience. You form a hypothesis. I think that if this belief is true, the following things will happen. Or if this belief is false, these other things will happen. And then you go out and do the experiment. And then discover. So you form hypotheses. You're now over this line because here you're dealing with sensible objects. Here you're dealing with intelligible objects. In other words, you can go and find a girl with a little Red Riding costume on, and you can find a real wolf. Those are things you can see. But you can't see a hypothesis. You can't smell or touch or hear a hypothesis. You're entering into the intellectual realm now. We would say abstraction. It's going to be a misleading word eventually, but it's one of those words that kind of help you get started to see where he's going. All right? We're 3/4 of the way there. We started with a little girl, we told her stories, and she's a teenager. As she grows, we show her the real things in the world, and we make sure that she has true beliefs. And now, let's say she's in college, and we're teaching her to critically assess beliefs. Is that it? Can she graduate because now she's got critical thinking, she knows how to form hypotheses? Is education complete when someone's a critical thinker? It's a real question, because in America, this movement of developing critical thinking is present in education, especially at the college level. The idea is there should be courses in critical thinking. At my university, there are categories of courses, and every student has to take at least one course in each category, and one of the categories is critical thinking. And so a lot of my courses count as critical thinking courses. The idea being, people come out of my courses, like most philosophy classes, learning how to form a hypothesis and assess the evidence for and against the hypothesis. But I'll put the question to you again. Is that the summit of education? Is someone fully educated if they're a critical thinker?
No.
No, I don't think so. What's missing?
Have to go back to normal life. You know what I mean? Like, let's say, teacher training practice.
Okay.
It's like doing teacher training practice in uni.
Yes.
They have to end up going back to
Okay.
the, I don't know, like normal settings of schools
Yes.
and in front of actual students, pupils.
Okay.
If the hypothesis you got in the teacher training practice in university is really working or not,
Yes. Yes.
you have to live in your life with
Yes.
the hypothesis you got.
Yeah, so it's not enough to have this method. The method has a purpose. What's the goal of the method? You put it in a very specific way that I accept. I think there could be other ways of putting it, which is in teacher training, you form hypotheses in your training, but then you go into the classroom and you find out whether they work, or I forget how you put it. So what is the goal of this process? Critical thinking is not the goal. Critical thinking is a means to the goal. If somebody leaves merely with critical thinking, they haven't achieved the goal. What's the point of critical thinking? I'll pause here because this is something you asked about on the first day. Skepticism, not Platonic skepticism, but Pyrrhonian skepticism, again, named after this Greek philosopher from the 4th century BC, Pyrrhonian skepticism, or sometimes just shortened as Pyrrhonism. I'll remind you what I was saying about it so long ago. He's the one who taught that painter, and I remembered his name after class. His name was Apelles. He was a painter who was trying to paint the foam on Alexander the Great's horse's mouth. The horse, by the way, is Bucephalus. None of this matters. And he couldn't paint the foam. And he got so frustrated that he just gave up and he threw the brush, and it glanced and it did the perfect foam. And that was a metaphor for education. You struggle so hard to get what, and then you don't get it, and you give up, and then you get it. Well, whatever that thing is, in the case of the Pyrrhonists, it was peace of mind. You seek understanding so that you can have peace, but all you do is get frustrated because there's arguments and objections, and there's always another book to read, and then there's this critic who dismisses what you say, and then you get into and so on, blah, blah, blah. You'll only achieve peace when you give the whole thing up. Now I'm asking you, critical thinking, is it just something that you do for its own sake, or is it there for another goal?
Happy life.
Okay? This is the Pyrrhonist answer. It's there for a happy life, and you achieve the happiness when you give it up. I'm not saying that's wrong. Are there other possibilities of what we do, hypotheses and science and so forth, critical thinking for? What's that?
The truth.
The truth. Again, I'm not saying you're wrong. We're going to get to what you said. The truth. And what is it called, the cognitive state that we have when we have the truth? Science is just a method that we use to work with hypotheses. Belief is just a mental state that we have about things in the real world. Imagination is what we have towards images. But what is the mental state, this highest of all mental states that we have when we have the truth? It's never wrong, because it always has the truth. What's it called in English? That's not wrong, but I'm just looking for the word that we've used before, just so that you can connect it up with what we did. I'll remind you. We've got cognitive states. This is from book 5. And then we've got objects. Every cognitive state has an object. And ignorance was of what is not, or non-being, or falsehood. And then we had belief, our old friend here, which is about what is and what is not, or becoming. This is, if I had my old diagram, this is like the little beauties, the things that are beautiful on some occasions and not beautiful on other occasions. They are and they are not. They're constantly changing. And then this is what is, reality, truth. So I'll put reality here. What is this cognitive state that has this as its object? Knowledge. Okay. And again, enlightenment wasn't wrong. It's just I want to make sure that you see that what we did before, we're just doing it now, but in a more expanded version. Very common with Plato. They start with a simple scheme, the dialogue goes round and round, and then they come to, and then they do it again, and it expands. Okay. So this is knowledge, also called in the English translation that I'm using, understanding. The Greek is noesis, which I mentioned before is the way up.
You know, like Yoshi touched on that word, you know, wisdom. What's
Yes.
the difference between wisdom and knowledge?
Okay, good. Well, there's one more stage. Going beyond the line. Something that makes real things real. What's that?
Good.
The good. Again, I put a little bracket around the O so that you get the idea what he's talking about. This is some hyper reality, some super reality, something beyond reality. And let me give you a sense, as I think I have before, of why he says it's beyond being. I mean, when we understand, there's us, and we're understanding something. The form, the idea. That's a dual relationship. It's seeking unity. In other words, when you are forming beliefs, you're trying to see the pattern in all of the diversity of the experience. And what these states, these cognitive states are, is they're increasing, more precise ways of getting at the thing. From the flickering images that are all over the place, to the physical objects which are fewer than the images, to the patterns of the physical objects, to the thing that the physical objects are reflections of. You're going for more and more unity. And what Plato sees is that this is still duality, subject and object. So that at the highest stage there can't be any duality, it's just unity. And that's why it's beyond being, in the sense of it can't be contemplated, because then that introduces the duality.
sex.
Sex, exactly. And again, just thinking of that as a metaphor, so going back to our previous understanding, but you'll see why. What does sex do in our lives? Two things. Well, I'll get the first one out of the way. It's really enjoyable. We're going to see that the reason to make this ascent for Plato is that's the most enjoyable thing that there could ever possibly be. Any pleasure that you get here is a shadow of the pleasure you'll get when you achieve unity with this. So what are the two things that sex gives people? Pleasure and reproduction, production, generation, poiesis. And in a dialogue that we're not reading, but I would recommend you read next if you want to keep reading Plato, the Symposium, you'll get it now. I mean, it's a very clear dialogue, but you'll get that he's got a lot more to say about what he says there. That's a dialogue about the beautiful, and he describes what it's like to achieve union with God, or the beautiful. And he says, once you've done that, you then become productive. Some people think production is generating children, but at the highest level, you generate beautiful things, poems. You become a teacher and generate beautiful souls. You become a politician and you generate beautiful cities, and so on. Okay. And there's our way up and our way down as well. There's the monk who just moves away from images, moves away from the physical world, moves away from science toward just pure, in a cave, contemplation, sex with God, and then leaves the cave and forms universities so that people can achieve this kind of understanding, and becomes a politician in order that the originals, the physical things, be arranged in the best possible way, and tells stories to kids in light of truth so that kids, even though they're getting lies in words, are getting truths in their soul. As if it were two ways. But I liked our conversation earlier to say that I don't think it's two ways. It's one thing.
ちょっと一つ質問
Okay.
なんでプラトンはこうグッドという言葉を使ってるのか、一番、究極のものじゃないですか。究極のレベルというかな。そこに対してグッドという言葉をどういう背景でそれを使ってるの？
How does Plato come up with using the word good, especially?
Yes. Do you remember the soul? What is the soul? One word answer.
What is the soul?
Yeah. One word.
Desire.
Exactly. Desire. What is it that we desire? You could think, but I don't want you to answer yet. I want to do this little test that Plato effectively does, and I had to skip it because we were rushed, but now I'll skip. No, I won't skip. All right. I'm elaborating something that he does in just 2 paragraphs. Okay, I have got something behind my back. Do you care whether it's real or whether it appears to be real? So, I've got this, and I'm going to give it to you. It's a Rolex. It's not actually, that's just pretend. It's a $10,000 watch, whatever that is in yen, like 500,000 yen for this Rolex. I'm going to give it to you. Do you care whether it really is a Rolex or whether it just seems to be a Rolex? And I want to help you understand what I'm asking you. I'm not saying that it will seem to you to be a Rolex, but everyone will say, oh, you're wearing a fake. I'm saying it will seem so perfect that even the jeweler will look and say, this is a Rolex. It will seem so to everybody. Would you care whether I gave you the real thing or it seemed like a Rolex?
Wouldn't care.
You wouldn't care. I think it would be weird to care. Because, I mean, I can see why one might care if I'm not careful in describing it, namely, oh, well, I don't want to be duped. I don't want to put on this fake Rolex and then, you know, I go to the party and everyone laughs because I'm wearing a fake Rolex. No, it's gonna seem so much like a Rolex. No human being will ever be able to tell that it's fake. Who cares? Who cares whether it's real or fake at that point? It'll tell perfect time just like a Rolex. It'll seem to everybody that it's a Rolex. It will be beautiful to people's eyes the way a Rolex is, etc., etc. Okay, so you get sort of how this goes? All right, now, I am going to offer you something else. Courage. Do you care? I'm going to imagine I'm God and I can just kind of put courage in you. Do you care whether I'm putting real courage in you or apparent courage? And now remember, this apparent courage will be so plausible that it will always seem to you as if it's real. And everybody else will think it's real. For all of time. Do you care?
I do.
You do. Okay. You do? Okay.
It's courage.
Okay. What about beauty? I've got something beautiful. And it will seem beautiful to you. And everybody else. Nobody will ever think it's not beautiful. They'll always say, oh my God, that's the most beautiful thing. But it won't really be beautiful. Do you care?
If it's beauty or whatever,
Yeah.
I don't care.
You don't care.
Yeah.
So you don't care about the Rolex. I'll just take you for a moment. You don't care about the Rolex. You don't care about beauty. You do care about courage when it comes to the difference between reality and appearance. Anybody else want to? I mean, it would be good for me to hear your opinions. We're not finished yet, but we're at the final stage, and I want to see where we are. Who would care that it's a real Rolex? Nobody. Who would care whether it's real beauty? Who would care whether it's real courage? You do, just you. Okay, so everybody else is fine with appearances for everything that I've mentioned, except Shunya just for courage. Okay, well, I'll do the final stage so you see where this is going.
For me,
Yeah,
courage, I care.
you care.
But if someone give me the apparent beauty,
Yeah,
it looks very
yeah,
beautiful,
yeah.
I might take it.
You might take it, yeah, right. Okay, so I think maybe the Rolex would be the nobody cares. Beauty, so, I mean, apparent is sufficient. Apparent is sufficient. And then courage, there's some hesitation. And now, I've got something behind my back. It's good. It's so good. But you'll never know whether it's real good. You'll always think it's good. Everybody in your life will always think it's good. But you won't know. It might actually be really bad. Would you care? Plato thinks, you think about this on your own, Plato thinks this is the one thing for which we all want the real. Where just thinking that we have something good and being confirmed in our opinion by what other people think, that feels nice. But what if we're all wrong and what I in fact have is bad? It seems like, Plato thinks it does, matter whether it's real or not. For other things, he thinks It doesn't. Now, I did this as a hierarchy. He thinks it starts to seem to matter more and more. Definitely for physical objects, it doesn't matter, he thinks. And then for the virtues and for beauty, seems to maybe start to matter. But for this, if his point is correct, this is something that people agree that they really want the real thing. It's nice to also believe that it's good and to have people think that it's good, but if it's bad, you don't want it. If you need an image for this, this is the cave. The people at the bottom of the cave might have images that make them feel like they've got the best of all lives, that they're the best of all people, that they have goodness, but they're actually in the bottom of a cave. It's all a trick. It's bad. And Plato thinks, and this is really driving the dialogue, there's this doubt in us that is fostered by this worry that what we have is not really good. And what that shows is we want what's really good. So Yoshi Sensei, this was my answer to your question. Why the good is your question. And I said first, what is the soul? Desire. Desire for what? What does desire really want? It likes Rolexes. It likes respect from other people. It likes money. It likes blah, 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 blah. It likes beauty. It likes courage. It loves goodness. And that's what it really wants, because that's the only thing for which it really cares, whether it's real. Everything else, it will be to some extent satisfied by mere appearance. So to summarize, Yoshi Sensei, it's a philosophy. Plato's philosophy is about desire, and it's telling us what you want is the real good. But that's not clear. What is the real good? We need a techne, a craft, a skill that will help us find the real good. And that's what philosophy is. Philosophy is the craft that tries to discover the real good. And that's why it's the summit of all education. Okay, you had a question. I just wanted to finish my thought.
Is that adjective? Good?
Objective.
Adjective?
Objective?
It's
Oh, adjective.
Yeah.
Well, this is the noun. This is the object of our desire. I want beauty, a thing. I want courage, a thing. I want goodness. So goodness, what would say? Or the good. All along, I've recommended that you think of the good as God. And here, it might help again. I mean, some people don't care about God at all. That's one thing. But if you care about God or the divine, do you want to have a relationship with the real divine or something that merely seems like it's divine? And a very concrete way of putting this question would be, your culture gives to you a religion. Your family, your school, your friends, a way of thinking about life and what's important and ultimately what's truly good. And it can occur to you at one point, as it does to many people, maybe my culture is wrong. Just because everybody around me believes it doesn't mean that it's true. That's the philosophical doubt that he's talking about. That's the beginning of the question, is what I've inherited from my society, this education that I've received, is it true? Is it about what's really good? Or is it just an accident of history and stories that got passed down and developed because they function well for kids to get through society and blah, 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 blah.
Like, yet again, these are for philosophers, just for philosophers, like maybe people in the cave, they just satisfied with the images.
Well, this is the question, does everybody want what's really good? That's what Plato says in the passage I'm referring to. It's in book 6. Or Do some people want what's really good, and other people are fine with the appearances? The funny thing is that he thinks there are three types of people.
Yeah.
And those other two types, honor lovers and money lovers, should be satisfied with appearances. I think he thinks that they often are, but if they're human beings, they've got a rational part of the soul. And that even if it's deep down and buried, it's there, craving what's real. And I think he thinks that's why the philosopher is the only integral person, the only person whose soul is harmonious. Because it's the only soul where that ultimate desire is made chief. In the other types of soul, that ultimate desire has to be suppressed, put in a closet somewhere, forgotten, repressed, etc., etc. And that soul, as a result, will always be in a battle with itself.
So I feel like it's just for philosophers, and then the discussion here, which is stressed by Plato, I feel like it's the governance. Who is going to govern the nation, republic,
Yes,
planets,
yes.
and it's a philosopher.
I'll say something that I said at lunch once, Yoshihiro-sensei, that there's a story about reincarnation at the end. And he's very interested in reincarnation. And he asked me what I thought about that story, and I said, well, there are a couple of things that I've always found very interesting about that story. One of the things that I find very interesting is that, so as background, when you die, according to the story, your soul goes to this field in heaven, and you get to choose what your next life will be. But you make that choice based on what you've learned in your previous life. And so I'll just tell you the two things that I find really interesting in that story. One is that Odysseus, the character from the Odyssey, who's had this grand, heroic life full of misfortunes and glory and so on, when he gets his choice, he chooses the life of a humble farmer in the middle of nowhere. He wants to have nothing to do with politics and war. He just wants a simple life, because that's what he learned from experience. So I find that very interesting. But the interesting thing, the second thing, was an answer to your question. The people who make the worst choices are the people who are coming from just cities, but they're not the philosopher kings, they're the subordinate people like the producers, the craftsmen, in the best city. Because they've been insulated from evil, because their leaders are so good. But they don't know why they're doing anything. They're just following the orders. So that when they go to make their choice, they don't have any wisdom. Their virtue, such as it was in the previous life, was just obedience and habit. And they didn't get Sophia, wisdom. And so when they make their choice, they make terrible choices. They choose the life of a tyrant, because it looks like, oh, he's rich and he's got power. And they don't look into it and realize, oh my God, he ends up eating his children. I didn't notice that. So those two lessons that I find interesting, that they go together. It's that you have to earn the wisdom on your own. Odysseus earned the wisdom on his own. And as a result, he wants a simple life. And the people from the best city didn't earn the wisdom on their own, so they make terrible mistakes.
But if it's governed by philosopher, it'll be all right.
You'll be, let's say you're a craftsman in the city governed by philosophers. And let's say you're a farmer. You'll live a good life, as good as you can. Because the philosopher kings will make good decisions, and so your city will be terrific, and the wars will be fought by the guardians, auxiliaries you don't have to worry about. You can just farm and enjoy family life and become prosperous and so on. But you don't get any wisdom, because you didn't have to make the hard decisions. And so when you go to the field in heaven, you'll make a foolish choice because you don't have wisdom. So I find it a big relief, because I think we live in terrible times. Japan much less so than America. But the consolation is that there's a chance for wisdom in terrible times. Whereas in the best of all times, you lose the opportunity to get wisdom unless you happen to be one of the philosopher kings.
So yeah, I'm not sure if we can posit place the goods in the apex of the diagrams for everyone. It'll be nice for the next stage of life.
Oh, I see. Now I think I see what you're asking. If it's a question about education, what I was describing was the full trajectory of education. But remember, the full trajectory is only given to the philosopher kings. The guardians, they're going to stop here. The auxiliaries, I mean. And the producers, they'll just be told stories. And they'll learn some patterns about their craft and so on. But when it comes to all of life, they're on their own.
He doesn't think that everybody should be philosophers.
No, exactly. I think very, very few people are cut out for it. I mean, very few people are cut out for the elite class of soldiers. But then within the elite class of soldiers, very few are going to become philosophers or queens.
Yeah, craftsman philosopher, warrior philosopher,
Yeah,
those kind of
don't exist. Don't exist. Okay, so here's where we are. We did the line. Now, because I'm saying it's kind of our break time, 10:30. So we'll break in 2 or 3 minutes once we make a decision. We'll have our break, we'll come back, and then what I'd like to do is give you a sense, because now what we just did was we finished book 6. Now, of course, you did the cave on the first day, and then I said a little things about the education of the philosopher kings. So we're finished book 7. We got 8, 9, 10. 8 and 9 are this political story, and it's a psychological story that's fascinating, and I think I can do it in an hour, and it gives you the answer to Glaucon's challenge, which is a comparison of the most just person with the most unjust person. So it brings the whole dialogue back. I think we need to do that. And that would be, if we ended there, I'll settle for that. But there are 2 more things that I think are so crucial. One is, to answer Glaucon, he not only compares souls, he then does something else, and he calls it the most important proof. It's about pleasure. And I gave you a kind of sense of it when I said that the attraction of this is that it's the most pleasant relationship you can possibly have. He explains why that's the case in this final proof. So it would be nice if, when we come back, I think we'll have an hour and a half, roughly, when we come back from break.
1時間半ぐらいですよね。
お昼ご飯に行くまでの時間。何時ぐらい
1時に出ればいいんだけどね。
1時まで。
10時15分からちょっと延長して、1時頃までして、それで食事に。
We can finish at 1 o'clock.
Okay, then there'll be enough time. So this is what I'm going to try and do. We'll have a break, 15 minutes. Then I'll spend an hour on the politics and the psychology. And then that will give us a half hour for these 2 crucial things. And this is just a really nice way to end up. This summarizes, I think, the most important lesson in the whole dialogue. And it's about fisheries. I told you, it turned out to be about fisheries in the end. Okay, so let's take our 15-minute break.
Forms って書いてますね。Forms って書いてある。
Forms
って書いてある。
Forms なんか。
簡単な質問が。グッドはギリシャ語で
Good agrees. Greek word. How do you say it?
Oh, the good?
Agree.
Yeah. Agathon. And in the symposium, that dialogue I recommended, there's a character named Agathon, and Socrates sits next to him.
He's a rabbi じゃないかな。
Okay, so by my count, there are 3 principles in the Republic. That is to say, just statements of what Plato takes to be true that are premises, crucial foundations for what he goes on to say in an argument. And we've had 2 of them before. The first one, and I mean, I call them principles. He doesn't say, here's a principle. One I call the principle of specialization, POS. That was back in book 2. That was the foundation upon which we built the ideal city. That was the principle that each one should do the task to which they're most suited. And by the way, once we saw what justice was in book 4, it turns out it was just the principle of specialization applied to the soul. The second of the 3 principles was the principle of contradiction, or POC. And that was the foundational premise for the argument that the soul has 3 parts. That was the principle that said, no one thing can do or undergo opposites in the same respect at the same time with respect to the same thing. And if we ever find something doing that, it can't be one thing but must be many things. And so the argument there was, well, we found the soul. It was drawn to respect, but then it was also drawn to money. And then sometimes it had to make a decision between those 2, so it had to be complicated. There had to be a part in it that wanted respect, and a part in it that wanted money. And then finally a part in it that wanted what's really good. Anyway, now is the third of the 3 principles as I understand them, and I call it the principle of degeneration. I'll read it. It's found at 545 C and D. Here's the English version. I'll let you find it if you want to look at the Japanese. Okay. Change, or revolution if you like, since we're going to be talking especially about politics. Change originates in the ruling element itself, when faction breaks out within it. So if you have a ruling element that's, let's say the samurai are ruling, they will be able to rule forever unless a faction breaks out within the samurai. Then there will be a revolution. But if this group remains of one mind, then, however small it is, change is impossible. So this actually gets called, I didn't realize this till I was reviewing for today's lecture, this gets called in 20th century political theory, elite theory. The idea being, as long as the elite is unified, it will always be able to control the masses. But revolution begins whenever there's a fracture within the elite, whenever the elites start disagreeing with one another, when faction breaks out within it. I've called it the principle of degeneration because it's going to be a story of change, how we can start with something perfect and how it can change to something less perfect, that will then change to something less perfect, and so on. And the logic of that change or degeneration is going to be faction, conflict, contradiction. And I have a hypothesis that I've not been able to prove, that these 3 principles that I've isolated are all just varieties of the same thing. Plato thinks that when something is one, it's unbreakable. It's only when it starts to disagree with itself that it then breaks into parts of the soul or factions within a state, and then change occurs. But as I say, I'm not able to prove that those 3 are the same. So are there any questions about this principle? It's one of these things, like the principle of contradiction or like the principle of specialization, that you want to be sure you understand, because it's the logic that drives everything in this chart I'm about to give you, or everything in books 8 and 9 about political revolutions. Any question about the POD, principle of degeneration? Again, my title, not Plato's. Okay, if not, then let's start with what we already know before we even get to book 8, and that is the constitution of the perfect city. How would you describe that perfect city in political terms? You can do it in Japanese, or ideally for me, English. Is it a democracy? Think back to book 4 when he described the perfect city, the utopia. Was it a democracy? Did everyone get one vote, and then the decisions were made based on the majority, especially of the craftsmen, since they're the bulk of the city?
Yeah, that's not according to Plato.
So that's not it, okay. So it's not a democracy. What would you describe it as?
Philosopher.
So you can call it philosophic, but of course, that's only going to mean something when somebody's read book 4, or read the Republic, and they know, well, what does Plato mean by philosopher, and what role will the philosophers, etc. So it's true, but here I'm looking for political terms that you would have known before you took my course. And you may not have heard them in English before, but go ahead.
Aristocratic.
Yeah, aristocracy.
Aristocracy.
Aristocracy, exactly. So aristocratic. That was the word I was looking for. I mentioned really on the beginning of the dialogue, because we read very carefully, and I told you about the two parts of the city, the aristocratic upper city and the democratic port city. And that Socrates and Glaucon Adimantus, they hail from the upper city, whereas the conversation takes place in the lower city. Kratos is power, and Aristo, does anyone remember what Aristos means? Agathon is good, Aristos means best. So, in the grammatical terms, this is the superlative of the comparative. Or better, I guess it would be good, better, best. Aristocratic is power of the best. And he thinks it's an aristocracy because he thinks the philosophers are best. That's why philosophic and aristocratic are both good. But it really just depends on how many philosophers there are in a generation. If you have 10, then it's going to be an aristocracy. But you might only have 1. Then what will it be? A kingdom. Yeah. So we say in English, monarchical. We say kingdom too, and that's fine. I'm just going to use these Greek political terms to keep consistent. Arche means rule, and monos means one. So there are 3 names for the best of all cities: philosophic, aristocratic, monarchic, or kingly. Structure. Let me just introduce this chart to you. This is my effort to systematize a lot of things that are happening in books 8 and 9. Books 8 and 9 are stories about degeneration, change, revolution from this perfect city to inferior cities. And what changes is the order, or the way it's structured. And the English word there is constitution. The way it's structured, the way it stands with itself. And the Greek word is politeia. So polis in Greek means city, and then politeia means structure of the city, constitution. In English, when we say constitution, especially in America, we think this written piece of paper, the United States Constitution. Maybe Japan has one too, especially after the war when General MacArthur probably wrote it. At any rate, he's not talking about a piece of paper. He's talking about the way the society is structured. So as a society here in this room, in a way we have a written constitution. I gather Some people never saw it. The syllabus, that would be like the written constitution. But hey, who cares about this, right? It's more about how this class works. The role that I play as the teacher, the role that Yoshi plays as my host, the way that Yoko plays the role of the translator, graduate students, auditors, sort of what we do on a daily basis. That would be the Constitution. Okay. One more thing to be said about this chart. It's a story about the degeneration of constitutions, but it's simultaneously telling us a story about cities with certain constitutions, but also souls with certain constitutions. So we've seen, to give you an example, we've seen a city with a structure. This was the best city. What was the ruling element called?
Guardians.
Yeah, guardians, good. Also philosophers.
Okay.
I'm just going to use that as a symbol for philosophers. The middle class.
Something.
Yeah, it's a strange English word, auxiliaries. It's from the Latin auxilium, which means helpers. And then finally the producers. So that was the structure or constitution of this best of all cities. But the soul of the ruler had a structure. What was the structure of the ruler's soul? What was the structure of the philosopher's soul? I'll give you the diagram. It's a triangle. And it has 3 layers.
Wisdom,
Good.
courage.
Good. So rational desire or reason. Do you remember the middle part?
Craftsman.
Well, so the craftsmen are over here in the city. And then in the soul, courage is the virtue. So we don't want to confuse the virtues.
Virtue.
Wisdom is the virtue of the rational desire. Courage is the virtue of spirited desire. And then temperance is the virtue of what kind of desire?
Self-control.
Control.
Well, self-control is the definition of temperance. That's the virtue. And it's a virtue of which part of the soul?
Appetites.
Good. The appetitive. So rational desire, spirited desire, appetitive desire, each with its own virtue. Okay, so that's review. We'll just do a bit more review in a second, but I want you to kind of familiarize yourself with this chart and what it's doing. So just to repeat. It's a story about constitutions. We've done this constitution before, and we're going to simultaneously do the city and the soul, and find in each instance they have the same structure. In fact, everything else is going to be the same as well. And this just follows from the method from the beginning of book 2, which is, hey, tell us about justice in the soul. Oh, that's going to be so hard. It's so small. We need to look at the big version in the city, and then we'll look to the soul. This is the consummation of that whole story. And I'll just remind you of something I said earlier, which might make more sense now. When Plato's writing in the early 4th century BC, there's a political vocabulary. There had been political authors, Herodotus, Thucydides, the Sophists, and there were words, aristocratic, monarchic, and so on, that they used to describe constitution. The Greeks made up those words. I mean, they're Greek words originally, but political theory as such in the West is born in Greece. That existed when Plato was writing. There was not a psychological vocabulary. So he's, as I said before, he's inventing the discipline of psychology. And this chart is really the fulfillment of that invention, because what he's going to show is that all of the political theory applies just as much to the soul. You can see an example here, but we'll see some more. All right, let's see if you can fill out the rest. What is considered to be good in the best city? If you turn to anyone in the city, especially the philosophers, and you say, what is good? Is it money? Is it honor? Is it a Rolex? Is it nice weather? What is good?
Wisdom.
Wisdom is the virtue that is knowledge of what's good. And what is it that's good? This is kind of a trick question. I mean, you know the answer, but it's just a weird way. I think I'll just give it to you because you'll feel stuck, but then when I say it, you'll just say, oh, of course. The good. You ask a philosopher in the city, what is good? The philosopher will know to say, the good is good. That sounds strange, but it's saying something. It would be like saying, if you said to a Christian, what is good? And the Christian said, God is good. Everything else that's good is good only because of its relationship with God. But God is goodness. Okay? This should be easier. What is justice in the perfect city? If you ask people in the perfect city, what is justice? Especially the philosopher kings, what do they say?
Ruling the city is good.
Well, I'm not asking what's good, I'm asking what's just. And ruling is going to be part of justice that the philosophers will engage in, but no one else will rule, only the philosophers will rule. So the soldiers, they won't be just by ruling, they'll be unjust if they try to rule. Justice is...
Do your job.
Yes. Each class doing its task. Or shouldn't you put it succinctly? Do your job. Do your job and don't do somebody else's job. But just to be precise, it's okay if a carpenter decides he doesn't want to deal with wood anymore and he becomes a shoemaker. That's fine. There simply cannot be movement between classes.
Oh, yeah.
If you have a producer's soul, you must stay a producer. Because if you try to play the philosopher, you'll only end up spoiling philosophy. And by the way, Book 6 is my favorite book of the Republic. And we skipped a lot of it. We skipped a lot of my favorite stuff. But I'll just mention what we skipped. I said I wouldn't do this, but here I am. It's about what happens to philosophy in a bad city. In a good city, well, the philosophers rule, and then they recruit the children who are best able to become philosophers, and they train them, and things go perfectly. But what about when those philosophical natures are born in bad cities? Book 6, the chunk that I had to skip, is about how philosophical natures get corrupted if they're born in the wrong city. He thinks the philosophic nature has a lot of power, but if it's not properly trained, it will become evil. It'll become a sophist. That's one thing that he talks about. And the other is, in the bad city, who will play the philosopher? And that's when he talks about how producers end up playing the role of philosophers. One of the reasons I love Book 6, and this is why it's okay that we skipped it, because you're not trained to become philosophy professors, but it's the book written for philosophy professors, because it's the book about how you should expect philosophy professors in a bad society to be bad. You should expect them not to be real philosophers, but to be fakes. In other words, the worst thing you can do is learn from a philosophy professor in a bad society. Anyway, so that's the part of Book 6 that I skipped. I'm just mentioning it if you want to go back and look at that. Okay, let's do the same for the soul. What if you ask a philosopher in the best city, what is good? What will she say? A Rolex? Money? Good weather?
The good.
The good, exactly. And what will justice be? And here, the slight difference is justice for the soul. Remember, the whole reason to talk about justice in the city was so that we could talk about it in the soul.
Rational desire will control other parts of
Yeah.
soul.
Okay. Very good. You get the idea. I'm just going to give you the simple formula. Each part of the soul does its task. Rational desire will understand the good and inform the rest of the city. Spirited desire will honor only what rational desire tells it to honor, and fear only what rational desire tells it to fear. Appetitive desire will pursue only the objects that rational desire says it should pursue. So this person, they'll have appetites and they'll have a desire for respect, but they'll only want to be respected by respectable people. They won't care about the respect of anybody else. They don't care about respect as such. They care only about the respect that the rational desire tells them is worth having. And they'll have appetites, but their appetites will be controlled by reason. So if reason says, you really should stop eating sweets because you're going to get diabetes, that person's soul will then, that person will then stop eating sweets. And will do so willingly. Okay, any questions then? That's sort of review. That's the template. We're now going to do all the other constitutions. Okay, so the method that we're going to use is we'll start, for each one, we'll start city, and then we'll do soul, and then we'll go down, start city, do soul, and so on, get to the bottom. The reason that change happens in anything, the reason change originates, is in the ruling element itself. When faction breaks out within it. So how will this city degenerate? There's only one way. Will it be the producers just get fed up and they revolt?
Tragedy.
What's that?
Tragedy.
Well, he thinks it is a tragedy. But what starts the tragedy? As usual, when I asked you a question and I gave you the answer, I gave you the wrong answer. I wanted you to say no. So does the revolution start because the producers just get fed up and then they go with pitchforks and they take over the city? No, because change originates in the ruling element itself. I'll just repeat something I said earlier. 20th century elite theory in political philosophy has this insight that there's no such thing as a popular revolution. There are revolutions like the Russian Revolution, the French Revolution, that seem like popular revolutions. That's the story that gets told about them. But elite theory says, you learn the history of those revolutions, they're not popular revolutions. The elite fractures, and then one side of the elite recruits the population to revolt against the other side. It's always a revolution of elites. Sometimes it involves the people, sometimes it doesn't. But there's no such thing as a popular revolution as such. I think that's true. I think elite theory is very important. But whether it's true or not, and whether elite theory matters or not, it's what Plato believes. So our goal now is understand what he believes. So how will this revolution happen? If this city is going to degenerate into something inferior, where does the change have to start? The top, the guardians. These guardians are going to have to somehow disagree with one another. There's going to have to be a faction. How will faction arise? These people are bred to be the best. That is to say, the best women are mated with the best men to produce the best children. And then those children are given the best education, crucial features of which are that the city's prosperity is their prosperity, and that they should have no individuality. They should give themselves completely. How would those people ever disagree with one another?
Yeah, yes. Telling what they believe. Yeah. And they pursue their opinion.
They give their own opinion. They start to assert their own individuality. Is that the thought? So yes, they lose that spirit of unity, but there's nothing in what Plato has described of the city that would allow you to predict that. Because at least as he set it up, the best women mate with the best men, so they have the best children, and the best children are given the best education, and And so there's no reason why they would ever start to do that. This is an important difference between this revolution and all the other ones. There is no contradiction in this city. It's an accident. There's nothing inherently unstable about this city, except that it's put into the material world. It's an ideal city, and when it's put into the material world, which is to say, we're imagining it now as a real city with flesh and blood human beings, that's going to be susceptible then to the mutability, the change of the material world, like the little bees. They are and they are not. So that just by chance, a disagreement will arise, not because of anything inherent to the city, but just because we're dealing with the material world, or as we say in the Christian sphere, a fallen world. This isn't the perfect world. This is the world after the fall. So there's no contradiction except the just being in the material world. If that sounds strange, I think it'll be a little clearer as we go on. You'll see by contrast with what else is possible. Here's just something I add. This isn't in the text, but it's there for you to think about. Which person in the dialogue, which character in the dialogue exemplifies this type of soul? Somebody whose soul is ordered according to reason, who's temperate, courageous, wise, and therefore just, who thinks the good is the good, who believes that this is justice. Socrates. Yeah, I think Socrates is being presented as the flesh and blood model of this type of person. All right, there's our first layer. All we're going to do now is churn out the other possibilities. Are there any questions about this method, sort of what these things mean? What this principle means, what a constitution is?
I feel like I didn't understand how the faction
Yes.
to happen
In the perfect city.
into the perfect city.
Yeah. Well, that's good that you don't understand because there isn't any reason given. And Plato's upfront about that. He feels like he's described the perfect city, so there's no reason a faction would break out within it. That's what makes it different from every other city. He's saying, however, if you were to put this into a real city, faction would arise. Not because of the structure, but because you put the structure into matter. So let's say you're God and you've got the beautiful, and you want to build a teapot that is the best image you can give of the beautiful. Well, you're God. You got the beautiful, you know exactly what it is, you can just use any clay, you do the best you can, and wow, that's an amazing teapot. But it's in matter, so some people are going to look at it and think that it's not beautiful. In the wrong light it will seem not beautiful. It will crack. Of course, the beautiful thing in Japan is kintsugi, where it cracks, then you can make it even better. That's not in Plato at all, the idea that you could make something better. Things just get worse and worse. I say that as a joke, but I think that's a very deep point about Plato. That he doesn't really have this idea that brokenness can be repaired and make it better than it was in the original. Christianity, by contrast, does have that idea. There's this idea in Christianity of happy fault, felix culpa. So, if you know the Christian story, Adam eats the apple. I don't know how much. Adam eats the apple. So the garden is perfect. Adam eats the apple, and as a result gets kicked out of the garden. And then life is really difficult. We have to work for our food, and we die, and we get sick, and so on. So Adam commits a fault, but it's a happy fault. Because this fallenness requires redemption. And the only way you get redemption in the Christian story is with Jesus. And so the idea is it's a happy fault because it makes possible Jesus. This would be like the kintsugi that repairs the broken vessel. It's one way in which I think Christianity is superior to Platonism. Okay, so if we're okay about the first layer, I'm going to switch ink just to get some more vividness. We're now going to get a degeneration. Before we do, crucial point. Simple point, but let's stress it. We've got these two structures, they're the same, but they're not the same by accident. They influence one another. So how do we get the structure of the city? Guardians on top, auxiliaries in the middle, producers. What does it say someone's a guardian? Or a philosopher?
So
They have a soul of this type. So there's an arrow in this direction that it's because of a soul of this type that you're able to have a city of this type. If there were no souls of this type, there'd be no guardians, there'd be no city like this. So the arrow goes in this direction. Souls create cities. But the parts that I left out of book 6 are about what happens if someone with that kind of soul is born into the wrong city. What is it that they don't get, that they need to fulfill their nature and become this person?
education.
Education, which is the arrow in the other direction. Cities make souls. Not from scratch. I mean, people mate and children are born, but the city then gives an education. But even from scratch, the city, at least in the perfect city, decides which woman mates with which man. So cities create souls and souls create cities. But in the city to soul direction, that's education. That's why I want to, for you all, really stress where education fits in this scheme. Okay. So, because of the brokenness of the material world, there's a flaw in how the children are taught or in how they're bred. And as a result, we get a revolution. Here are two English words that only exist in Plato. We use them to translate what he says, but you won't find them anywhere else. Timocratic, you've got your kratos, power, and arche, rule. These are just synonyms. Time means honor in Greek. So this is power or rule of people who care about honor. Who are they? Who are the people in the original city who are preoccupied with honor?
Guardian?
You're probably right, but if we're being specific, they're guardians, auxiliaries, and producers. And the guardians end up being equated with philosophers. But both these classes are originally called guardians. That's probably why you said that. So if we're being specific, the auxiliaries. These are the people who think the good is honor. I mean, the philosophers tell them the good is the good, and they repeat that. But in their hearts, they believe that it's honor. That's what they're driven for. They're soldiers. The way you get honor is through victory in battle. So this city that degenerates, I'll give you the structure first, and we'll talk about how it happened. This city is soldiers and everybody else. How did it get that way? Well, as I said, there's no inherent explanation, but there's a flaw in the education system that gets introduced somehow, or there's a poor breeding. So you might have a generation where there's nobody with a philosophic nature. And so the education will be given to people who are actually soldiers at heart. They'll understand it in soldiers' terms. They'll turn everything into a pursuit of honor. And once there are enough of them, there'll be a division. There'll be the soldier guardians and the true guardians, and they'll fight. And eventually, he's imagining the soldiers win, and you get a revolution. Everyone else, some of them will be former guardians. I'm going to put quotations now because they're no longer guardians, and some of them will be former producers. But they'll all be in a class of slaves. So this society he's imagining is a society of masters and slaves. Soldiers and everybody who's there to make the life of the soldier possible. There's an actual city in Greece that existed when Plato wrote and that had existed for centuries beforehand, and it was the rival to Athens during the Great War of Socrates' lifetime. That's Sparta. So when he describes the timocracy, he's describing Sparta. And I think I've mentioned this before, if you are interested in Sparta, I highly recommend Plutarch. The Lives of the Great Greeks and Romans is the book. You know, it's hundreds of pages long. But the life of Lycurgus, 30 pages. He's the founder of Sparta. And in those 30 pages, Plutarch describes what Sparta's like. You know, it's a life of Lycurgus, but it's really just an excuse to talk about Sparta.
これ何の本ですか？プロタゴラス。
プルタルコスかな。プルタルコスですよね。
はい。
He's a Platonist who's writing, I believe, in the 2nd century AD. In fact, late 1st century, because he's in the court of Nero. I'm not mistaken. But at any rate, he tells history of Greece and Rome to that point, the history of Republican Rome and the early empire, and then the history of Greece. But he tells it as a Platonist. So with your training in Plato, if you're interested in Greek and Roman history, that's the place to go. Just read a life, once a week. And it, gives you history of Greece and Rome. At any rate, that's the description of Sparta. So what is considered to be good in the timarchy, or the timocracy? When you go to people in Sparta, for example, and you ask them, especially the leaders, what is good?
Honor.
Honor, exactly. Now you have to do a little bit of imagining, or remember what you read, or just imagine you have the resources up here on the board. What would justice be? And let me give you a tip. Justice is the rule or rules that you need to make the good possible. So if the good is the good, as in the perfect city, this is the rule that will allow this to be manifest, to be realized, embodied. But that tip I've just given you applies to all the cities. So imagine your good of your city is honor. That's the thing that your city is there to celebrate, to augment. What rule would help that happen? Or what rules would help that happen? I'll give you one more tip. Think about a society if you don't know Sparta, think about a society where the soldiers ruled. What is that called in the 20th century? A militaristic society devoted to victory. In English, we call it fascism.
Oh, yeah.
So I gather your society was fascistic in the 30s? That's at least the impression that we have in the West and from the histories that I've read. And I mean no insult, I'm trying to work with examples that people will be familiar with. So would you agree that's a society that was ruled by soldiers? Of course the emperor was in charge, but it was the soldiers, I gather, who decided what happened. So if that's roughly true, I'm just trying to provoke your imaginations. What kind of laws existed in that society so that honor would be achieved?
Power.
Well, power is not a law. Like, think of a law or a rule. You can think of Imperial Japan. You can think of Nazi Germany. You can also just think of the army or the military as it exists now. That's a society within a society.
Obey.
Exactly. Obedience.
Yes.
Obedience, but to what? Is it obedience to the good? Because you could put obedience here, as long as it's obedience to the good.
To the ruler.
To the ruler. And so what is that called? The reason I'm going to scratch this out is your instinct was right, but I wanted to show you that specific kind of obedience. If you're in the army and you're a private, I don't know what the equivalent would be in the Japanese army, but the lowest rank, you have to obey
Order.
hierarchy, we say. If you're a private, you don't obey the general. You probably never hear about the general. Whom do you obey?
Boss.
Soldiers.
Yeah, well, the words are probably different. In English, the sergeant, or
Sergeant.
the captain, or the lieutenant. In other words, the officer directly above you. And then he has to obey the officer above him until you get up to the generals.
Okay. His or her boss.
Yes. So you've got a hierarchy of rank. And the rules of rank would be the rule that would keep in place the structure, namely the army or the fascistic society, so that it could achieve honor, especially by foreign conquest. Another way of describing this would be loyalty. Loyalty to your corps, your company, your unit, your nation, whatever layer.
I feel like it's kind of, in a way, same with the like top parts. Each class do your task.
Yes.
But they're aiming for is just a difference.
Yes.
I feel like that's so it's like they aiming for the goods or they aiming for honor.
Yes.
That's the only difference. I felt like
That's insightful. So, slaves should do their task here.
yeah,
And what is their task?
like obey.
Obey
Yeah.
whoever's above them.
Yes.
And you could say here, their task is to obey who's ever above. But they also have tasks,
to
crafts and so on. And so they've got their own tasks and they have to be true to them, but whenever the guardians step in and say don't or do, then they have to obey the higher authority.
But just like
Yeah.
I felt like there's only difference between them.
Yeah.
Is the difference of the goal, the difference of the goods. Yeah.
Okay, that's very, very insightful. I mean, one way of summarizing this whole chart is that politics, constitutions, are always about what people take to be good. Societies are built around a notion of what's good. If you build a society around God or some eternal goodness, you're going to have a society of one sort. If you build a society around honor, you're going to have a society of a different sort. A lot of the words and so on will remain the same, but they'll get different content. So in here, in this society, honor matters if it's judged to be good. Here, honor matters for its own sake. So here, let's fight a war if it will help us achieve the good. But if it is a bad war, we will not fight it, even if it means we acquire territory and new subjects and so on. Here, if the war gives us honor, more territory, more subjects, we will fight it. No question of whether it's good or bad. It increases our honor. So I think it's very, very insightful. And it gets to the main point, which is it's always about what's good, what's taken to be good. So a derivative point from that, a smaller point, is what's considered just always depends on what's considered good. The good is the primary category. So this whole dialogue, it's a bit of a bait and switch. We started by talking about justice. Justice, 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 blah, 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 for like 2 weeks in this course. We just talked about justice. And then you notice like last class and this class, we're shifting. We're starting to talk about the good, the line, the good, and so on. That's deliberate because Plato thinks that's what it's ultimately about. But you can't understand this until you see it in the light of that. So it's another reason why. Do you remember at the end of book 4, I said, well, it's over. We defined justice. That was the whole goal. Why would we keep going? Well, now you know. Because justice without an understanding of what's good is not justice. It's just an empty formula. Okay. Well, what rules in the soul, the timocratic soul?
Spirited.
Very good. Spirited desire. And rational and appetitive desire are slaves to spirited desire. What does that mean? It's a metaphor. I'll give you an example. If I'm a philosophic soul, imagine I'm this type. And I'll use the example I used before. That I like sweets, my appetitive desire just craves desserts, but then my doctor says, your blood sugar is getting too high. You've got to rein in the sweets. What does my soul do?
In each layer.
Yeah, start with rational desire. What does rational desire do?
Stop.
Yeah, it decides, hey, I want to live. Doctor tells me how to live, so I'm deciding I'm going to cut back on sweets. Let's just skip the spirited desire, go right to the appetitive desire. What does the appetitive desire do?
Craving for the sweets. Or...
Well, it's not that the craving goes away completely, but you won't see the contrast unless you can imagine a person who, when they decide, I'm going to cut back on sweets, their craving diminishes.
Mm.
You have to imagine, in order to see what this person would be like, their appetites obey their reason.
Mm.
When their reason says, it's time for me to stop doing that, their appetites wither for that. Or, I should be doing more of that, the appetite will grow for that. The appetite follows the reason.
Mm. Mm.
It's persuaded by it. Strange word.
Yeah.
Strange word, and now I'll explain why. In this case, imagine a spirited person, where what I care about is what other people think of me. All right? Doctor says, I got to cut back on the sweets. Why? What rules? What happens? How do I respond to the doctor? What goes on in my soul?
You think you should follow the doctor's...
Yeah, it might be like, I respect him and I want his respect, so I'm going to do what he says. Or it might be, if I get diabetes, then I'll look kind of ugly and I want to have the respect of other people. Whatever, it'll always be thinking about what will other people think of me. And what will the appetites within me do when I say, you know, time for me to cut back because I respect my doctor. What will the appetites? Imagine yourself. Just imagine yourself.
Control.
They'll have to control the appetites. The appetites will not wither. They will still want what they want. And the spirited part will have to force. That's the internal slavery. A war within the self. And this part will win, because we've described it as this kind of constitution. We'll see when it loses what happens. This part will win, but there will always be a resentful element that says no, and has to be forced. So this is the person with strong willpower, in the sense of they're constantly tempted, but they can control themselves because something is really important to them. In this case, they want to be respected by other people. Yeah, so this is the person who, it wouldn't be so much the doctor, it would be, they want to look good on the beach in a bathing suit. And that gives them their motivation. That's not the kind of motivation that gets rid of appetites. That's just the motivation that might give you enough strength to control your appetites. All right? What does this person think is good? This is easy at this point. Honor. Or status, respect. You can, whatever synonyms in English or Japanese that work for you. When we're talking about a militaristic society, it helps to just talk about honor. But, the others work there as well. What will justice be for this kind of person? If you ask this person, what is justice? What will he say?
do your job. Like, but following the
I know.
spirited desire. Yeah.
Okay, well, do your job following the spirited desire, where the spirited desire wants respect from other
Yeah.
people.
Which is called, yeah.
And so how do you get respect from other people in actual life? I can think of two ways. There's the hard way and the easy way. The hard way is you do something extraordinary that they look up to you, they admire you. But just, here I'm just talking about garden variety respect. If you want people to like you, like think about Facebook or any other social media. If you want people to like your posts, what's the easiest way to get them to like your posts?
Following others' tastes.
Yeah, and so
Grasping the-
I'm just looking for like a really specific thing. I was hoping that the younger students would just immediately know, because there are two ways to get likes on Instagram or whatever. What is the most popular one here for your age? I might not be able to make a connection, but
Posting something serious.
but like which Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, what's the social media that people in their 20s use? Snapchat, I don't know.
Instagram.
Instagram? Okay. Instagram, perfect. There are two ways to get likes on Instagram. One is you post a picture that people really like. That's like what I was saying. If you want respect, do something really extraordinary that people just like. That's the hard way. Then there's the easy way. Let's say your pictures are just average. No one's going to just say, wow, what an amazing picture. But you want to get a lot of likes, and your only goal is to get a lot of likes. There's just one simple thing you can do. What's that? Like other people's posts. If you go to one of your friends and like everything that they do, they're going to start liking your things as a way of saying thank you. And you don't want to make it too obvious. Like, don't stalk them. Don't go and like 100 things. Just like every time they post something, like it. Do that with everybody. You'll find you'll just get a lot of likes back. People like people who like them. It's called loyalty. Before we look at the contradictions, which character, when asked what is justice, gives the response that you would expect a Timocrat to give? I've given you the hint. The answer is all about loyalty.
Losing the loyalty from others.
Yeah, how is it put? I mean, I know it's hard because he read it in Japanese, but I said it probably a dozen times. There's a guy in the first book of the Republic, and he's one of the three who gives a definition of justice. And he gives a definition that's completely about loyalty. That's all it's about.
Soldiers? Soldiers?
He's a soldier. He actually is a soldier, so that's another reason why this has to be what Plato has in mind.
Oh, you're talking about character?
Yes.
Oh, okay, sorry, yeah.
So give me his name or give me his definition of justice.
Glaucon?
No? Glaucon never gives a definition. He's just there as the friendly, tell us more, Socrates.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not good at
That's okay.
distinguishing the person.
I know,
in
I
this
know.
book, yeah.
Very good, yes, Polemarchus. And do you remember his definition? Justice is benefiting friends, harming enemies. In other words, stay loyal to your friends and help them. Like their posts. And never like the enemy's posts. On Twitter that's called subtweet. You quote that other enemy and then you say something critical about that. This is the secret to social media, by the way. Social media is just timocracy writ large. It's all about people trying to get status. And again, not to say every single person has that as their primary goal. There are different ways to engage with it. But 9 times out of 10, if you want to understand something happening on social media, it's just this. It's the spirited part of the soul looking for respect or status. And the way that it gets it is through loyalty. how does a city that's timocratic come about? Because there's a leading class that has souls like this, namely the soldiers. So that's how you get the city from the soul. How do you get timocratic souls? Where do they come from?
Structure.
The structure. And what's the word that you all share as majors that is the word for how structures of cities generate structures of souls?
Yep.
What's the word?
Education.
Education. Yeah, good.
And culture.
Yeah. Well, education for Plato doesn't mean sitting in a classroom. It means everything that shapes who you are. And let's face it, even today, where we sit in classrooms until we're 25 years old or whatever, sitting in classrooms is probably not even in the top 5 things that make us who we are. That top 5 is, for most people, something like parents, friends, media, then maybe school. Maybe sports teachers, music, music classes, whatever. It's like sitting in school is maybe in the top 5 at the bottom. And Plato's onto that. That's what he means by education. Whatever it is that shapes you and makes you who you are. Whatever it is that gives you the structure of your soul. Okay?
The most crucial tragedy here is the wrong or false education or wrong and false culture.
That's right.
Especially for guardians candidates. Yeah.
Terrific. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, yeah.
Yes. And that's why it broke my heart to skip that part of book 6. Because that sort of says, that's the ultimate tragedy. When philosophers get ruined. Because then they become evil. They become sophists. And then they perpetuate bad education.
In a way, it doesn't matter if that happens to the normal citizen or craftsman.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
That's right. And you have, it's a very simple and appealing and I think true idea. You have this in the superhero movies that have been popular in America for 25 years now. I don't know if they've come over here. Marvel, DC comic movies, And you have this saying, at least in the Spider-Man ones, with great power comes great responsibility. Right? In other words, if you're born with a superpower, if you're given the right education and path, you become a superhero. But if you're given the wrong education and path, you become the supervillain.
Yeah.
And so philosophers are like the superheroes who can be heroes or villains. Philosophers or sophists. So Thrasymachus is the anti-philosopher. He's born with a philosophic nature, but he becomes corrupted. And now he's going on and corrupting other people. Think about how he behaves in that book. Just wanting to win. He wants people to clap. Now aren't you going to praise me? Why aren't you paying me? I just told you what justice is. I'm used to getting paid for this. And he's going to go and teach people that justice is the advantage of the stronger. Okay, in the interest of keeping moving forward, let's go back to the city. What's the contradiction? Because now, you'll see, we didn't really have a contradiction here. It was just by chance. Now there's a real problem in this city that's going to create its own revolution. And I'm going to repeat something I said earlier. It's a clue. Principle of degeneration. Change, or revolution, originates in the ruling element itself. So first tip, where are you going to look for the revolution to start in the democracy? Will the slaves just rebel? We're tired of being slaves with pitchforks and we're going to go and kill the masters. Like the Russian Revolution or French Revolution is supposed to be like. No. Change does not originate in the ruled. It originates in the rulers. Change originates in the ruling element itself. Those are the rulers. The arche, the kratos, the power, the rule. So it's within the soldiers that the revolution is going to begin.
Mm-hmm.
What will they have to disagree about, ultimately, that will cause the revolution?
Like a battle winning soldiers
They're going to battle with each other, and one side's going to win. But my question is, what will the battle be about?
Ruling governance, responsibility of governance.
Yeah. I don't know enough about the history of Japan in the 30s and 40s, and there's the outside war that messes everything up. But you have to imagine a unified military class who's all pursuing honor. They all agree what the virtues are, military virtues, conquest, victory, subjugation of others, and so on. But then they have to disagree about something, so that that program that was successful at first would start to disintegrate. What would they disagree about? I'll put a pause on the Japanese example, and I'll tell you the Spartan example that Plato has in mind. The Spartans defeated the Athenians in the Peloponnesian War. So that war was roughly 431 to roughly 401, 30 years. And Plato's writing this afterwards. So Sparta has defeated Athens. Those two cities were rivals. Athens had a much bigger empire, and then they fought and Sparta won. So Athens is defeated. Sparta now has an opportunity for an empire. It started as a coherent city where everybody in the ruling class had the same training, very rigorous military training. By the way, they had 7 slaves for every 1 soldier. They were called helots, and they were there just to farm the land and make it possible for these people to train for the military all day long, all year long. Very cohesive city. They never lost a battle when they had that cohesion. But then they acquired an empire. And as they expanded, they sent the generals to the distant areas of Greece to rule. What do you think happened to those generals? I don't know anywhere near enough Japanese history to know whether this happened in the Japanese case. I bet it did, because human nature is the same everywhere. When Americans send generals, probably MacArthur's a great example. When America sends a general far away, what does he become?
Honored.
Well, he's honored back home, but what's he doing when he's ruling?
Sometimes general corrupts.
They get corrupted. They start living like kings. I think that's pretty much what he did. Until he got recalled. Because he was seen as a king. I mean, it was the Korean War that undid him, because he was basically rivaling Truman, and Truman said, you're fired. But until then, he acted like he was a king. This is Plato's point, and he saw it happen in Spartan history. The generals go out, and they become like kings, and they start to serve themselves, and not the city. And they get interested in not only honor, but also, in the Spartan case, money. This has happened much more recently in the American case, that we're always fighting wars all over the place. And so Afghanistan was our most recent catastrophe. And the generals would go there and become corrupted, get money from the opium trade and so on. So the division, I'll just tell you, the division that arises within these ruling classes, that some of them stay true to the original ideal, honor, but others have a new ideal. And it starts subtly at first. They hide it because they know it's not approved of. But as more and more of them have this ideal, they can start to flaunt it. What is it that they want? I've already mentioned it. But eventually, they become so powerful that they defeat the faction that's devoted to honor. And they revolutionize the city. What do you think they want? I mentioned it before.
Money.
Money. Wealth. So what is the contradiction? I'll tell you in this case, and then that will give you the formula for the rest of the examples. Imagine that general. He cares about honor. So let's say MacArthur. He cares about honor. He wants to be honored back in America. So he comes to Japan and he rules, and he's getting corrupted. He's starting to care about money. Is he going to be writing home to Truman, I am getting so rich over here? in here we have to imagine America as like Sparta in the sense of it cares about honor, which isn't actually the way America is, so it's not a good example. But I'm trying to get you to see the logic here. Imagine America is all about honor. Sends a general to rule a conquered territory. When he writes home, what's going to be the main values that he's celebrating in his letters? When he's saying, I'm doing this and I'm doing this because of...
Money?
Do you think he'll say that? If back home all people care about is honor? If he says, I'm getting really rich over here, Truman would just fire him. What does he have to say? Even though he is starting to get rich and he's caring about it more and more, what's he going to write in his letters? And there's cables. He's not going to say, I'm getting really, really rich over here. No, because he'd get fired. He hides that. And instead he says, I'm doing this and this and that for the sake of the honor of the United States. In other words, he'll keep up the appearance of honor. Well, actually pursuing money. So why does that happen? Think about honor. What is honor? Or what is status? Or what is respect?
Down to social relationship.
Exactly. Let me give you an example that I've used before that will highlight this. Here I am teaching this class. There's a certain status or honor that you're giving me. You're listening to me, for example. You're being respectful and you're writing down things I'm saying, and so on. I could be doing that just because I like honor, or I could be doing it because I care about the material and I'm pursuing the truth and I want you to know the truth, and so on. The second one would be about reality. Namely, do I really know what Plato says? Can I get you to see what he really says? And so on. The first one is not about reality at all. It's about how do you perceive me? We did this with the doctor. There's the doctor that wears the white coat and has the degrees from Harvard, but doesn't know anything about medicine. If you really like being thought of as a doctor, you could do those things and then you would get honored as a doctor, as long as you were careful. And then there's, let's say, the guy who has no white coat, has no degrees, but he always knows exactly what's wrong with somebody. He wouldn't have any honor, but he would have the reality of medicine. Honor is just what people think of you. So now, when MacArthur, our example, is over in Japan getting rich, and he writes back home to say, I'm doing this and that, not because I'm getting rich, which is my real, but because it's augmenting the honor of the United States. Has he violated honor as a value? The answer is no. It's tricky, but the answer is no, because all honor is what people think of you. So if he can get Truman to think that he's doing things for honor, then he's getting honored by Truman. He keeps his position as regent of Japan. The conflict, I'll summarize. Well, we're going to see this over and over again, so it'll sink in. The conflict is that honor is one of these values where appearance equals reality, which is to say, there is no reality, it's just appearance. And because that's the case for honor, because that's the case, you can do things in secret and still keep the value. To really stress this, could a philosopher devote himself to getting rich and nobody knows about it? Could he still get the good? A capital G good? No, because the good is not about what people think. The good is ultimate reality. It's like, again, to use the example of God. God sees everything, what's true and what isn't, and doesn't care how you appear to other people. So if you're getting really, really rich while pretending to be doing good, that's not going to help you with God. That's the difference between the good as a value and all the other values, is that this one's about reality. These are all about appearances. And once you have values that are about appearances, then your ruling class is always going to be able to put up a front and then do something in secret. Those values will always permit that. And that's how faction will always break out within the ruling elements. And revolution will always ensue. Because these values, to summarize, these values are unstable. They're based on appearances. There's no reality about them. Nothing secures them. And so nothing secures a constitution that's organized around these degenerate values. That's the big point that we're going to see over and over again. So you'll have other chances, but anyone have any questions?
Do you remember the question that I asked you a little bit? Like 511.
About the divided line?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's like without any like visible sense, and then philosopher or someone such as philosophers is gonna grasp the thing as it is, as it has the idea
Yes.
in itself,
Yes.
without any visible sense.
That's right. No visible, no appearance, and as a result, no room for deception. That allows me to make a nice summary. These allow for deception. This does not. That's why this degenerates only because of the material world. Just accidents happen. Whereas here, the degeneration is inevitable. Again, I'm circling the point, just putting it different ways. These are inferior values. We'll get to the other. These are inferior values because they're not real. And if you organize a community around false values, that community will eventually, inevitably disintegrate.
So, I don't know. You picked up the sentence such as appearance equal reality
Yes.
as a conflict
Yes.
for the democracy.
Yes.
But it's the actual fact for the philosophers to become like that, you know. Appearance will be reality for philosophers in a way.
That's very clever. And I created that confusion, so let me try and resolve it. So we don't have Miyamoto, so I'm going to have to go with you. So, you remember, she now has appendicitis. And I'm not a doctor, so it seems to me that she just ate spicy food. My appearance is not the reality. But you're a doctor. So the way it seems to you after you palpate and you do an x-ray, the way it seems to you is the way it is. So what knowledge gives you, doctor, philosopher, whatever, what knowledge gives you is that the way things seem to you is the way they are. But the relationship is reality makes things seem a certain way to you. Reality is fundamental. Knowledge is focused on reality, and when you have knowledge, you get the appearance that is reality. Okay? By contrast, the sophist, the one who can get anyone to honor anything, who can make money by convincing people to buy anything, they focus on appearance, and they get people to believe that that is the reality. So it's a question of emphasis. The knower is emphasizing reality. The sophist is emphasizing appearance.
So again, it's the same for,
Yes.
you know, like a top
Yes.
of the diagram, but it's like, it looks same, but it's different.
Exactly. And let me just jump to the conclusion, or at least one of the conclusions, because that's just so insightful. What is Thrasymachus's? I won't keep you in suspense. He's going to be down here. Characters. What is his definition of justice?
I don't remember, but
No. Does anyone remember Thrasymachus's definition of justice?
benefit for friends and
That's Polemachus.
あ、そっか。
Yeah, benefiting friends and harming enemies. There were three definitions in the first book. Polemachus was second. Cephalus was first. He said justice is returning what's owed and telling the truth. And Thrasymachus?
まあ強い人がなんとか言います。
People who have strength.
The advantage of the stronger. Okay? So that's his definition. And Socrates criticizes it relentlessly in book 1, and it's refuted. But do you remember the blind men and the elephant? There's always truth in what the blind men are saying. It's just they've misunderstood. They have a part. They don't realize what the whole is. They've confused a part with the whole. Excuse me. Thrasymachus says justice is the advantage of the stronger. Well, if you understand those words in a different way, he's absolutely right. Think of the perfect city. Who's the stronger in that city?
Guardian.
The guardians. What is to their advantage?
They're drafting to the goods.
The good.
Yeah.
So justice then, if you put the advantage of the stronger, you'd be correct. It's doing what's to the advantage of the guardians. But since they're aimed at the good, everybody wins. So what Socrates was refuting in book 1 was not that formula, but a misunderstanding of what it meant. Because Thrasymachus doesn't mean by stronger guardians. The reason these people are stronger is because they have knowledge of the good. And that's in Socrates' new understanding of stronger. Stronger means knowing what's good. Thrasymachus doesn't mean knowing what's good by stronger. He means what? You just think about the type of guy Thrasymachus is, and he says stronger. What does he mean?
Just literally strong. Like,
But not physical strength, because Socrates ridicules him. He says, oh, you mean 10 pounds of meat for Polydamas, the wrestler? No, I'm not talking about wrestling. I'm talking about
I don't remember.
not physical strength, but political strength. Power. Thrasymachus means power for power's sake. Plato has no problem with power so long as it's given to the people who have knowledge of the good. So they're both into power, if you like. But there's just a crucial difference. For Plato, power serves the good. For Thrasymachus, power serves itself. But that's the only difference. Everything else, they have the same kind of nature, they're both brilliant people, they both say the right words. It's just, that is the biggest difference in life. And in the end, what the Republic is doing is just illustrating two types of life. A life devoted to power, or a life devoted to the good. Okay, well that's skipping ahead. I've got your revolution going here. The city is going to have the same structure where these masters, they're not soldiers anymore because they're devoted to wealth. So what do we call people who are devoted to wealth and are very good at getting it? Very simple English word. You could just say the Japanese. If somebody really cares about money and they're really good at getting it, they become
Business.
rich.
Rich.
Yeah, rich. The rulers of this city now are the rich. Before, they were soldiers, but remember the soldiers split. Some of them still cared about honor, some of them started caring about money. If we had more time, we would talk about how that switch happens. He describes stages, but we don't. I'm just giving you the conclusion. In the end, you get a revolution of the rich ruling over the poor. Those who have money, those who don't have money. But even these poor people, what do they want? Do they want the good? No, they have no idea what that is. That's long lost by this point. Do they want honor? No. I mean, military training and so on is way beyond their pay grade. What is it that they want? The same thing that the poor always want.
money.
They want more money. Everybody in the city wants money. Some people have it, some people don't. This city is called, in Greek, the oligarchic. Arche is rule again. Oligos means few. So an oligarchy is a rule of the few. But when the Greeks said oligarchy, they always meant by few, the few who are rich. There's another word that doesn't occur in Plato, but is more precise and sort of fits with this whole way of talking. Plutocratic. Kratos, again, power. Pluto is the god of wealth. So we say in English sometimes, plutocracy, plutocratic, rule of the rich. What is justice like in an oligarchic city? And remember the formula. Justice is always the rule or rules that promote the good, as it's understood by the rulers. So loyalty was justice in the democracy because it promoted honor. What rule or value would we have here that would promote wealth? And again, here you can think of actual societies. We live in basically an oligarchy. And I would say Japan is probably very similar to America in that sense. The rich rule. Little known secret, we call ourselves democracies, but that's mostly fake, so that people don't rebel. It's mostly rule of the rich. We could talk about that. I don't know enough about Japan to prove it. I can with America. But I'm just trying to give you a sense of what kind of laws do we have? What's the value of our laws? What's the point? Where the goal is to make sure that wealth can be made. I'll make it easy. Here's my biggest hint. If we're going to do business together, which is how you get money, wealth, how you create wealth. You do business, you trade, exchange. What's the fundamental rule to make sure that that can happen? If we do a deal where you're going to make 10 of those for me, but you need what we call in English the capital. You need the money in order to make them, and then you'll take a profit. And you tell me, okay, give me $1,000. Let's say 100. Give me $1,000. You're speaking. Give me $1,000, and then you'll make 100 of those for me. And I say, that's great. Here's $1,000. Well, what has to happen so that that kind of relationship that's necessary to create wealth continues? What could she do that would make it very hard for me to do business with her in the future? Unless I were stupid.
Just break the contract.
Break the contract. A society based around wealth, its fundamental notion of justice is going to be contracts. Honoring contracts. Honor's not the right word. What I mean is obeying contracts. Obeying is not the right word. Fulfilling contracts. Paying your debts. Returning what's owed. So debts, contracts, repayment. In an oligarchy, you're just going to have tons of laws about contracts and debts and repayments and who owes what whom in what circumstance. And I'm not a lawyer. What's that?
Rights.
Rights. Yeah, who's owed what? I'm not a lawyer, but my sense is most of American law is like that. It's a whole body of law called the civil law. You know, there's criminal law, like don't murder people and so on, but I think that that's relatively small compared to civil law, which is all about contracts. Well, I'm going to fill this in. Well, you're going to fill it in. Tell me what rules in the person who has an oligarchic soul.
Mostly same.
Well, there we go. 3 parts of the soul. Rational desire wants what's really good. Spirited desire wants what's apparently good, namely honor. And appetitive desire wants what's apparently good, namely...
Yeah, we can buy
Yes.
we can fulfill appetites with
That's right.
money.
With money. And so what does this appetitive desire learn in a society? I mean, it might originally want sleep and food and drink and sex and so on, but it realizes, hey, if I make a lot of money, I can have all those things. So it eventually becomes a lover of money. So it's appetitive desire that rules in this person. This is the money-loving person. So far, all we have is a more complicated scheme of what we had earlier, which is 3 types of people: the money lover, the honor lover, and the wisdom lover. Think about a person like this. I mean, you could think about an actual person you know, but if you don't have anyone that comes to mind, just think about a money lover. Like, what would the life of the money lover be like? They're a human being. They would still have reason. They wouldn't be just, a grunting pig or a plant. They would have language. They would have reason. But what would their reason and their language be for? What would it do? By contrast, in the philosopher, the reason is aimed towards what's really good. It's doing its task. In the spirited person, reason is there, but what will reason be figuring out what to do in the spirited person? If I'm a spirited person and I really want honor, and I have some reason in my soul, but the reason is not doing its task any longer, it's doing whatever the ruling element wants, what will reason be doing in the spirited person?
Honor.
Figuring out how to get as much honor as possible. Figuring things out like, hey, I want people to like my posts on social media. Hey, I got the trick. I'm just going to like other people's posts. That would be reason in the service of spirited desire. Now, the appetitive soul wants money. So what is reason going to do in the soul of the appetitive person? Still going to be there, but it's not going to be pursuing wisdom any longer. What's it going to be doing?
It's for the sake of money.
Figuring out how to make as much money as possible. So this is simplifying, but this person would go to business school. They would use their reason to try and get as much money as possible. And I think more realistically, they would start a business. They would use their reason to figure out, like, what's the niche in the market where I can make the most amount of money? So the reason would serve this as a slave to a master. Just as here, what would this person do? I don't have an answer ready to hand. What would this person specialize in? Marketing, maybe? Namely, use their reason to try and figure out how to get as much honor as possible. What would this person major in? Philosophy, education, whatever you like. Something that's got some real value that doesn't depend on how people think about it. Okay, so you're not going to be surprised, in the interest of time. Wealth, contracts, repayment, etc., etc. The conflict is going to be that appearance equals reality, which is to say, when somebody pursues money, like in this society, where they pursue, their goal is money. Do they have to actually follow the contracts, or do they merely have to seem to follow the contracts?
Appearance.
Appearance. In fact, you can get rich much quicker if you seem to follow the contracts but don't. In other words, if you steal from people but you can get away with it, that's the best way to become rich.
Just giving that paper.
Yeah, counterfeit money,
Contracts. Yeah.
or having really fancy lawyers so that if you do something illegal, you always get free, or doing all your business. This happens in America. I don't know what the equivalent in Japan would be. There probably is no equivalent. Doing all your business in an offshore island so that it's never taxed and you don't have to obey the laws. There are just 100 ways. This random example comes to mind. We had a presidential candidate 12 years ago, Mitt Romney. He's actually a good man, but as is typical of the rich in America, Officially, they're supposed to pay almost 40% of their income in taxes, but it was determined in that year he only paid 11%. But he obeyed all the laws. Because when you're really, really rich, you can hire really, really good lawyers who find what are called loopholes. In other words, places where you can move your money where it doesn't get taxed, or things you can do with it so that it won't get taxed in that year. And then you move it around somewhere else for next year. So you're following all the laws, you seem to be just in following your contracts, but you're getting really, really rich. That's an inherent contradiction. Because there are going to be the people who are good at that among the rich, and the people who aren't good at that among the rich. And the people who are good at it are going to get richer and richer, and these people who aren't good at it are going to fall into the class of the poor. So that an oligarchy, in ways that, I don't have time, there's an even better argument, but in oligarchy, the class of the rich over each generation will shrink and shrink. And when you have an oligarchy where you have 10% rich and 90% poor, you can get away with that. But when you start to get into the 1%, 99% territory, or 0.1, 99.9% territory, you're in trouble. I don't know if you had this in Japan, but 13 years ago in America, there was a movement, I think it was 2011, there was a movement called Occupy Wall Street. It was a lot of protests, especially by young people, about capitalism. It was right after this huge financial crash that happened in the Western world at any rate. And a lot of young people sort of felt like, and their slogan was, "We are the 99%. The idea was, it's not fair that 1% of the society rules 99% of the society. I'm going to explain that a bit more, but first, give me the character in the dialogue who thinks that justice is repaying debts. You might not remember his name, but do you remember the old man whose house where the entire dialogue happens? You got it? Very good, Cephalus. Just as a small note, this just shows, I mean, Plato's a genius of just magnificent proportions, but here just like a small fact that shows like he's playing a game that is beyond us. Cephalus is a real guy, you know, and that was really his son, and I described it on the second day. Cephalus means, in Greek, head. Like hydrocephalus, if you get water on the brain, or encephalitis, an infection of the brain. He's head of the family. Polemarchus, that means leader of the battle. So he has this amazing ability to choose people, like our Agathon, that was a real tragedian who really did win a contest. As if you read that play, that drinking party happens the night that he wins a play contest, and then Socrates gets to sit next to this guy whose name just happens to be the Good. Anyway, now I have to introduce something new. It's straightforward, but we can't go farther in our chart until we get this. Plato now distinguishes between three types of appetite. And the reason he needs that distinction is we've got appetitive, spirited, rational. Where are we going to get the two more? Well, these are going to be two types of appetites. Well, this is the third. That's why we're doing this. The first distinction is between necessary and unnecessary appetites. So necessary appetites are any appetite that you must satisfy to survive. Or that when you satisfy it, you're benefited. Your body is. So, I'll use his examples and see if you get them, and then we can try other examples if you don't. Bread. Necessary or unnecessary?
Necessary.
Necessary. Relishes. This is a very Greek example, but relishes. What's that? It's not really a fair question. I'll tell you why. The way Greeks at parties ate was there was bread and then relishes. The relishes were all the fancy sauces. and you ate by dipping the bread in the relish. So Plato's making a distinction between the bread, which gives you the calories you need to survive, and the relishes, which give you the vitamins and minerals that you need to be healthy. But that's a very Greek example. Necessary. Protein. You need protein to survive. Certain vitamins. I don't know enough about nutrition, where you would still survive without them, like say vitamin C, but you would be sick. So the necessary appetites are whatever you need to survive or whatever you need to be healthy. So sleep. Sleep is a necessary appetite. But, just like with food, there's a limit. So how many calories a day are necessary? Well, it's going to differ for everybody's body, but it's going to be somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000, depending on how active you are, how big you are. 10,000 calories a day. Necessary? No, unnecessary. 20,000, unnecessary, and so on. There's a limit, because we have bodies of a certain type. So too sleep. Sleep, necessary or unnecessary? Necessary. Sleeping 8 hours a night, necessary? Now remember, either for survival or for benefit. Yeah, at least they say in America that if you sleep 8 hours a night, that's the optimal amount for health. 7.5 or whatever it is. Sleeping 16 hours a day, necessary or unnecessary? Unnecessary, unless you're really sick. Unnecessary. You don't need it that much sleep for survival, and it's not good for you either. Your muscles will atrophy. You're not active. We could do it for all of the appetites, except one. Which one does Plato think is not necessary for survival and does not benefit you? He's quite explicit about this. I'll list the major ones that we did back when we did the soul. Food, drink, sleep, temperature, breathing, relief, going to the bathroom, sex. One of those is not necessary, according to Plato. Sex. He thinks you can survive without it, and it's not to your benefit. If you followed him, occasionally he just says, this ruins people's minds. So he is an ascetic in that sense. All the other appetites are necessary within a limit. And he might think the same about sex too, it's not clear. But the point is that any one of those appetites can become unnecessary if it's taken to an extreme, if it goes beyond its limit. But so too, there are objects of those appetites that are unnecessary. So, consuming water, necessary or unnecessary? Yes. Consuming vodka, unnecessary. You don't need it for survival, and it's not good for you. He's not saying never indulge unnecessary appetites. What he's saying is that a life focused on necessary appetites will be the most controlled, because there are natural limits. Once you're into the territory of unnecessary appetites, there's no natural limit. Because vodka is not good for you in any quantity. Obviously, it'll kill you in extreme quantities, but once you start drinking vodka, what's the right amount to drink? There's no answer to that question. Whereas, once you start eating, which of course we all do, what's the right amount? There's an answer to that question. For you, a certain number of calories is best, and a certain diet is best. And it's hard to figure that out, that's why you need a doctor, a nutritionist, but there's an answer. Okay? Now, everyone clear on necessary versus unnecessary? Because next he distinguishes between two types of unnecessary desires: the lawful ones and the lawless ones. He didn't drink vodka, they didn't have vodka, they had wine. He would have thought of wine as an unnecessary appetite, but a lawful one. Whereas cannibalism, desire to eat human flesh, would be lawless. He gives 3 examples: eating human flesh, having sex with your parents, and killing your parents. There are many, many others. But these are the ones that the Greek tragedians talked about, especially if you've read Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, for example. Sleeping with your mother and killing your father is sort of the famous instance of lawless crimes that were committed. And Plato goes on to say, don't pretend like you don't have these desires, because when you go to sleep, you have weird dreams. And those dreams come from somewhere. If you've ever done anything lawless in your dreams, that desire is in you somewhere. And terrific if you don't enact it, but if it's there, it could be fed, it could be exaggerated to the point that you then start doing it in everyday life. And what is the difference between lawful and lawless? He never says. He just gives examples. I think what he means is, you can have a society where people drink wine. If everybody's drunk all the time, obviously it's not going to work, but you can have a society where people drink wine. You can have a society where people eat too much, and so on. But a society where people eat each other, a society where people sleep with their parents, a society where people kill their parents, that can't last. So these lawless appetites are appetites that would very quickly destroy a society if they were indulged. Okay? I'm going to return to the chart, but are there any questions about that distinction, which we're going to need to finish the chart?
Yes, yeah, there's a distinction between lawful and lawless.
Yeah. So in the end, there are 3 types of desire: necessary, unnecessary lawful, unnecessary lawless. And the oligarchic soul, which we just simply call the appetitive soul, is a very specific kind of appetitive soul. It's an appetitive soul that's ruled by necessary appetites. Think about it. If you want to get rich, what would be the best, and if you could just program your body and your soul, what would be the best type of appetite to put in yourself? And what would you exclude from your set of appetites? If your only goal were to get rich, would you include a desire for food and drink and sleep?
No, just money.
Well, you would die, so you wouldn't even get the chance to make the money. You're going to program yourself with necessary appetites because that's the only way you're going to survive and be healthy. So the person who wants to make money will allow herself necessary appetites. What's the problem with unnecessary appetites when it comes to making money? Let's say your goal is to make money, but you really like vodka. Is there any contradiction? What if you really like heroin? What if you really like prostitutes? What if you really like yachts with lots of prostitutes and cocaine? What's the problem? If your goal is to make money.
You're going to waste your money.
You're going to waste your money. And the reason you're going to waste it is that once you enter into unnecessary appetites, there's no limit. It's not only that you need these things to be alive and healthy, it's that you can only spend so much money on healthy food because your body can only consume so much healthy food. And the rest can be saved. But once you switch over to unnecessary appetites, your bank account will be drained. Unless you manage to control them somehow really rigidly, without a principle, because there's no natural limit. You just have to say, all right, tonight 3 drinks, no more. Just because that's the way it is. I'm never going to drink more than 10 drinks a week, or whatever.
Yeah, but the fun fact, it's a hot topic, but like, I got surprised, like that was 1 year ago, 2 years ago.
Mhm.
Yoshi says, I still remember, like he was, he used to be doing cigarettes really quite a lot, and like, let's say 60 times in a day.
You used to smoke 60 cigarettes a day? Okay.
And like, but like at some points, the appetite for cigarettes totally stops.
No, in him, but in most people it never stops once it starts.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah.
I have a story on this, but we'll just talk about it at lunch. I mean,
Yeah.
addiction is a fascinating psychological topic and philosophical
Yeah.
topic.
It's off topic, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's a tough act.
Yeah, yeah. So it stopped, and I have a friend who was a smoking addict, and then it just stopped one day, but there was a deep reason. But I don't know Yoshi well enough, or let alone his smoking habits, to know why that happened. But I know in the case of my friend, who's a former student, there was a definite reason, but it wasn't because there was some limit. There was, again, I'll have to tell you the story.
ちょっとリミットはねない、まあ、あるのはあるんだが僕の場合はものすごくたくさん吸ってたので吸えなくなったんやだからリミットがあったんですよそれでタバコをやめたんやから
For him, there was a limit in a way because he just smoked so
Yeah,
much,
yeah,
and
yeah.
after a certain point,
Yeah,
he just cannot.
yes.
That's
吸えないだけ吸ってたわけでギリギリは吸っても吸えなくなって終わったんやだからたくさん吸うっていうのは意味があるんだよ
Yeah, so
he says there is a meaning to smoke a lot.
Yes.
Then
Okay.
だから
you know.
こういう欲望ってだから自分で我慢しないで最大限満たすともうなんかなくなるんやわ
When you
こういう
fulfill
こういう
your
こういう
desire up to the very most,
Right.
and then
Right.
it just disappears.
Oh yeah, tell that to a heroin addict.
Yeah, that's right.
No, I really mean it. Fascinating question. Let's pause it just in the interest of finishing the Republic. Okay, so I'm going to speed up now. So we've got another revolution. It's caused for the same reason. Now I can explain what happened, is that some of these rich people are going to live only according to necessary appetites. Others are going to have unnecessary appetites. And these people are going to get richer and richer. These people are going to spend their money. And the way that that's going to happen is with loans. He thinks loans are the end of an oligarchy. I mean, they're the beginning of it because it's all about contracts and debts and payments. But that's the inherent contradiction. Because the people with the unnecessary appetites are going to borrow money from them, who are going to get interest payments, until eventually these people bankrupt and go into the class of the poor. Then you get a democratic revolution. This one works? Okay. Then you get a democratic revolution. And the reason I've drawn it as a circle is the poor revolt. This really is it's a popular revolution, but only because the rich who became poor lead the poor against the rich who stayed rich. There's no class structure here. So I'm going to just put individuals as dots. Imagine a classless society. This would be a pure democracy. Everybody gets one vote. Whereas before, we could have spelled out more about the justice of the oligarchy. The rich would get to vote and the poor would not get to vote. That was true in the United States at its founding, for example. Only the rich, only landowners were able to vote. Okay. What is the goal? What is considered good in the democracy? Now, this is a hard question to answer. I'm going to kind of nudge you in a direction. Imagine you're one of these poor people who's been oppressed by the rich, let's say for generations in your family, and what do you want most of all? I mean, you want money.
Freedom.
You want freedom. You've been oppressed by them. Your revolution is going to promise you freedom as the good. And at least in America, this is the official account of the good. Just constantly talk about freedom, the importance of freedom and so on. That is declining, but that's sort of typically been the American ideal of what's good in life. It's a philosophical mistake, because freedom, while valuable, is not valuable for its own sake. Freedom is good because then it allows you to choose something good. If you were just free in a vacuum with no choices, it would be worthless. There need to be choices, and some of them have to be good. So it's always been an inherently contradictory good, because it can't be good. It's a means to the good.
Yeah, like the one who is striving or fighting for diversity nowadays is also missing important aspects. Like, yeah.
Well, I agree, but diversity is mentioned, maybe not with that word in Japanese, but the notion of diversity is mentioned as the just. Because before, people were considered to be of two types. The rich, who were the good people, and the poor, who were the bad people. And then when the poor rebel, they don't want to be seen as the bad people anymore. They want to be valued for who they are. And they recognize, well, I'm different from you, and you're different from her, and so on. So let everyone be valued for who they are. That's where you get this notion of diversity in a democracy. But more important than that even, or really central, is the notion of justice that is really prevailing in the United States now, which is some value that people feel they need in order to be free. Equality, exactly. Now, I'm going to tell you something I only learned last year. Like I said, I've taught this 25 times, whatever it's been, and every time I teach it, I learn something new. And this is one of my more recent discoveries. In the best city, and then still here, the good is primary, and the just is what accomplishes the good. The just is the rule or set of rules that allow you to accomplish the good. I tried to make that clear earlier on. By the time you get down here, things have become so chaotic and messy that it's not really clear which of these is good and which is just. And so you get, actually in America, a battle between these two values. Constant battle between these two values. The left promotes primarily equality. The right promotes primarily freedom. They're both onto a truth about democracy. And what Plato would say was, that battle is inevitable. Democracy will inevitably conflict with itself because by that point it's so chaotic and messy it can't distinguish between the good and the just. Okay, so we're going to keep this formula for now. So this is the democratic city, which is power of the people. This soul, you won't be surprised, has the same structure. I didn't emphasize last time something that by now you will intuit, which is these souls make this kind of city, but this kind of city makes these kind of souls through education. So too here. So that's why you keep getting souls of the same type, is this binary relation, but especially education. So this is what people in a democracy look like if you could do an X-ray of their soul. What are those dots?
Totally mixed up.
Mixed up what, though? What we have them here, I just didn't draw them as dots. We've got dots here, but they're separated into types.
Yeah.
What are they?
Everything.
Well, here they're citizens, because that's the city. But in the soul, what is the soul made up of? Here too, but in every city to this point, the things that I'm talking about as dots are organized into structures. By this point, the revolution has proceeded so far, there's no organization. But what are these things? They're the soul. Remember, what's the soul? Desire. So these are desires. This is a little spirited desire. Spirited desire number 1. This is spirited desire number 2. You know, I want to be respected by my friends. I want to be respected by my family. Whatever. This is appetitive desire number 1. I'm just going to do AD. I mean, this is so small it doesn't matter at this point. But you're just going to have a lot of appetitive desires. Some of them are going to be necessary. Some of them are going to be unnecessary. Among the unnecessary, some are going to be lawful. Some are going to be lawless. This was the case here too. It's just that the proportions were different and there was a structure. There's even going to be rational desire. Which gets to your earlier question. Even in the degenerate soul, in the degenerate society, there's still going to be like an inkling of wanting the real good. But it's going to be swamped by all these others. And the principle of democracy in a city and in a soul is everyone gets one vote. Now, we know what that means in a city. What does that mean in a soul? It's that when you make a decision, if you have a democratic soul, it's just like all your desires rush forward and whatever is most numerous gets to do what it wants to do. In this city, appetitive desires were more numerous in this soul, but reason controlled them. Here, reason is just by itself, it's just no more powerful than anything else. So what will this person do if every time they decide they take a vote and every desire gets to vote?
Respects every single desire.
Yeah, so that's where the diversity is going to come as the notion of justice. Every desire is going to want to have its goal, which is freedom, without any restriction from any other kind of desire. And they're all going to be treated equally as a kind of justice. Same problem as before. There is no democratic soul, I don't think, in the dialogue. Why not? And this is tentative. I'm tentatively saying there's no democratic soul, and I'm also tentatively saying what the reason is. Why do you think a democratic soul didn't participate in this dialogue? Well, think about yourself. Imagine we're like imitating the Republic. Twice a week, we sit in here for 3 hours. Today it's like 4. That's a long time. And you read a hard text, and then you think through some of these hard things. What does that require? Just to participate in this course, which is kind of like the dialogue. What do you need?
Rational desire.
You don't need rational desire, but it's nice, because then you're doing it for the sake of wisdom. But you could be doing it for a grade, which would be like spirited desire. Although I'm not grading anybody, so I guess that's not why you're here. So fulfilling a requirement, getting the degree, getting a job. I think there are lots of reasons to be here, so lots of desires might be motivating you. But what do we all need just to show up here at 9 o'clock twice a week and sit still for 3 or 4 hours and follow the argument? A certain order in our soul, a certain discipline. It's easy to overlook the marvel of what we're doing and what's happening in all these classrooms. By the time you get to 20 years old, your society has formed you to have a certain structure. So that this kind of person, you probably don't know many of these people. This is the kind of person who, every day, they want to do something different. He describes this kind of person. One day they want to join the military, the next day they want to be a businessman. Right? They're really into drinking, and then they decide to go on a diet and go to the gym. But, the plan of the gym only lasts a week because they're too tempted by some new hobby, etc., etc. That would be a democratic soul. That's why I think there is no character. There's nobody in this dialogue who could sit through an entire night's discussion and participate. They might be there in the background, but as far as I can tell, they're not participating. Okay, in the interest of time, what do you think the rebellion is caused by here? It's always caused by the good. So think about why there's a necessary revolution when there's total freedom. What do you get when you get total freedom? Imagine Japanese society, everybody could just do whatever they want at any time. I don't actually know what would happen because in America it's very easy to imagine. Like everyone would sleep in, no one would go to work. I sort of feel like people would still kind of keep doing things here, which is one reason why it's so much better.
It's a chaotic.
It would become total chaos. It would become total chaos. And when people experience total chaos, what do they crave? I mean, if the society breaks down and all of a sudden nothing's working, by the way, that's what America's becoming like. It's one reason why being here makes me so angry. Because this is like, I can experience what a functioning society is like. Things work here. It's just made me realize back home, like, half the time I want to do something, or I buy something, or I hire somebody, half the time it doesn't work. And it's just a feeling, it's called learned helplessness. So just like, why bother? And I've only been here a month, but I sort of feel like that feeling is gone. Like, anytime I want something and it says that that will happen, I go to the store, I talk to the person, and it happens. Like, everybody does their job here and does it well. And it seems like when Japanese don't do their job well, they apologize. Like if something doesn't work, like they feel ashamed and they take responsibility. There's nothing like that in America. It's one reason why this is happening. It's just kind of slowly disintegrating. Like people just don't care anymore. When people don't care and when things get really chaotic, what do people want? Imagine, like, there's no food in the store and the trains aren't running any longer and there's crime everywhere. What would you really just want? Maybe not you, but many people. If you know Italian fascism, what did Mussolini promise? So this is maybe a myth, but this is sort of a myth that captures the truth. The trains were chaotic. You could never trust. I mean, that's kind of the feeling like I'm saying about America. It's like you go to the train station, it says it's going to be there at 10, it never comes. Or it comes at 10:45 and you're late for your meeting. So then you just realize, well, forget it, I'm not going to take the train. What did Mussolini promise famously? Yoshi, you nodded like you know.
Order.
Order. He said the trains will run on time. So what the total chaotic city craves is a tyrant. Someone who will restore order. Now, the particular version of order that the democracy fantasizes about is informed by the fact that many of them are poor. You know, some of them are going to be rich. It should have been fewer than that. And these poor people who are experiencing all this chaos, they look at the rich who are living in like gated mansions who still have some order, and they say, this isn't fair. Everybody's supposed to be equal. It's not fair that you have more money. It's not fair that you still get to live among order. So somebody comes before the people. Originally he's called a demagogue, which I think I brought this up in this class for some reason before, a leader of the people. He comes forward to the people and he says, I'm going to give you order and I'm going to give you prosperity. We're going to take the money away from the rich and we're going to redistribute it so that we will achieve the dream of equality and you will get order back. So give me total control. This is to symbolize the orders that the tyrant now gives. Give me a police bodyguard so that I can enforce my total control and to make sure that I'm safe, because after all, the rich aren't going to like this. And I need an army because I'm going to have to march to the mansions of the rich and I'm going to have to take away their money. So give me all the power and I will use it in the service of you. As Plato says, he starts as a demagogue, he becomes a tyrant. Because once you give him all that power, what's to stop him from using that power for his own sake? So what is the goal? If you ask the tyrant, what is the good? Power. The just is total obedience to the tyrant. That's why I didn't want to use obedience earlier, and I chose loyalty. This is the tyrannical constitution, tyrannical city, and then the tyrannical soul. You really get it if you can tell me what these dots are. That should be easy. What are the dots? Same as before. desires, all the chaotic desires, but one desire stands out from them all and says, I'm going to give order to your life. You just have to give me everything, all the power, and I will regiment the soul. So imagine a person whose life is totally chaotic, but then one desire stands out and says, serve me, and I will give you meaning and purpose and drive again. Can you think of a desire like that? A desire that's going to get total power? And obedience to that desire is going to be justice? Think of a person who has one desire, and their whole life is about satisfying that one desire, and they get extremely angry if they cannot satisfy that desire. If you get between them and what they want, this one thing, they become violent. Chances are you know someone like this, at least if you're at my point in life. If you're younger, I hope you haven't, but this is not unusual, at least in America. A person who's totally fixated on getting one thing, getting it regularly, their whole life is organized around getting that one thing, and if you stand between them and that one thing, they get angry at you, sometimes violent. They'll steal in order to get it. They'll be violent in order to get it, or to get someone out of the way between them and it. What do I have in mind? This is not in Plato. It's not the word he uses, but I think this is the best analogy we have. I found it at any rate. This is the addict. The addict is like a tyrannical city. One desire, like take the heroin addiction that I mentioned earlier. I just want that one thing. I'll do anything I'll organize my whole life. All my desires will be organized so that I get more heroin. I'll steal for it, and if you get between me and my heroin, I'll attack you. And what's the end? Where does that end? If the tyrannical soul becomes a tyrant and can do whatever he wants, Plato actually says the worst possible life is when the tyrannical soul becomes a tyrant. Because if I'm a heroin addict in an ordered society, like Japan or even America, there are consequences if I do too much heroin, or if I attack you, if I steal. The law prohibits me from doing it. But if I become tyrant, I can do as much heroin as I want. I can kill anyone who gets between me and my heroin, and I'll never get punished. What's the inevitable result of that?
People will kill him.
Either kill the tyrant or he'll die of the overdose. And so now, in the interest of time, we're finally at this comparison of souls. Because remember what Glaucon said, show me the perfectly unjust soul, compare it with the perfectly just soul. And remember, the perfectly unjust soul will have a reputation of injustice to make sure that we're focusing on the soul. And the perfectly unjust soul will have a reputation for justice. So what we're being asked to compare is Socrates, who has the perfectly just soul, but gets killed by the Athenians because he's quote-unquote unjust. And you have the allegory of the cave to know why Plato thinks that happened. He went down into the cave to try and help them. They got angry and they killed him. So what we're being asked to do is compare Socrates with the tyrannical soul who becomes the tyrant. And if you look at the tyrant from the outside and you don't know psychology, what you see is someone who can do whatever he wants. Everybody listens to him. Whatever he does is called just. He makes the laws. He's rich. He's famous. He gets to marry whomever he wants. But if you look inside his soul, you realize that one meaningless desire that's preoccupied only with achieving its own satisfaction dominates everything in his life. And Socrates, Glaucon is saying, would you rather live that life or this life? And to make it a little more vivid, would you rather be Thrasymachus or Socrates? Now, Thrasymachus is not a tyrant, but he wants to be, and he's got the skill to become one, because he can make anything seem any way he wants it to be, through speech. That's how you get power, that's how you get money, that's how you get honor. And he actually says, the best life of all is that of the tyrant. So, although the perfect comparison for Glaucon's challenge would be the Socrates versus the tyrant with the tyrannical soul, we have two characters, and the question is, the philosopher or the sophist? Which is the best life, and thus who offers the best education? And by this point, Socrates thinks it's obvious.
It looks obvious, but it's hard to access actually. In a way that's, let's say, so there's the last one.
Thrasymachus?
Thrasymachus.
Yeah.
Like to say, this penalty. Yeah. Someone who lost a family, maybe son or daughter or like a mom or a father, one of his or her families are killed by someone, and then you are gonna be ending up being furious about the killer.
Yes.
Oh, I wanna kill him. I wanna retaliate to him, and we have this penalty.
Yes.
In States and Japan as well.
Yes.
I'm able to understand their feelings, yeah. But in Plato's sense, maybe they're getting furious about, they're getting too much crazy about social relationships, which is called family. Instead
Maybe.
of, instead of the goods.
Yeah. Yeah, he's not opposed to the death penalty, so he wouldn't be against, if you caught the criminal, killing the criminal. But I think he would be against becoming preoccupied with revenge. And the connection I can make with what we've been talking about is the tyrant would be able to get revenge very easily. He's in control of the law. Whereas Socrates is helpless. He's just one guy. And in the end, he's the one who gets killed. So what I'm getting from your question, I agree with that Plato thinks human life is not to be overvalued. If you overvalue human life, he thinks you'll get attached to the wrong things. But you have to cultivate, not indifference, but a kind of, we might say in English, stoicism. Stoicism, a particular philosophy that comes out of Socrates. A particular stoicism about death, and thus about human life.
Yeah. I was thinking about family, yeah.
Yes. Well, and particularly, we're not going to get to it because we're almost at one, but what this passage is about is immortality. It's this argument for why the soul is immortal. And then that sets up the reincarnation story. And if you really believe the soul is immortal, and especially if it gets reincarnated, you won't be as sad about death as you would be if you don't. And you might still be sad. Like, I get sad, like, when I say goodbye to my kids and I come to Japan for a month. I know I'm going to see them again, but it's still sad. But the fact that I'm going to see them makes it less sad than if I'd said goodbye forever. So if you accept the immortality of the soul, you accept reincarnation, he thinks that's one way you can cultivate this stoicism about human life. That it's not, each life is not as important as you would think it was once you realize you get an infinite number of chances. Okay, shall we wrap it up there? Okay. Thank you so much for taking my course.